Emma Parker's scissors froze mid-snip, her trained eyes widening at what lay beneath Margaret Reynolds' matted hair. What should have been healthy scalp was instead a battlefield of angry lesions, dark, irregular growths, and crusted infection. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, her nursing instincts immediately cataloging the severity: melanoma, advanced infection, months of neglect. Dorothy Wilson gasped from across the salon, her knitting needles clattering to the floor, while Tom Reynolds' face transformed from irritation to something darker. Emma's fingers trembled as she gently lowered the hair back in place, remembering how she'd smiled at this quiet woman just 5 minutes earlier, complimenting her on her lovely thick hair. "Mrs. Reynolds needs emergency medical attention," Emma announced firmly, though her heart hammered. "I'm calling an ambulance right now." How long had this woman suffered in silence? And would she survive what Emma had just discovered? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Millfield, Maine sat nestled between rolling hills and dense pine forests, the kind of small town where folks still left doors unlocked and brought casseroles when someone got sick. Main Street consisted of a post office, diner, hardware store, and Emma's Salon, a narrow brick building wedged between the pharmacy and the Millfield Gazette office. The salon's large front window displayed a weathered barber pole that had been spinning since Emma's grandfather opened the place in 1952. Emma Parker hadn't planned on becoming a hairdresser. At 38, with streaks of premature silver in her chestnut hair, she'd spent 15 years as an ER nurse until her husband's death 3 years ago. The grief had been too much, the hospital too full of memories, so she'd traded syringes for scissors, reviving her grandfather's shop and finding unexpected solace in the rhythm of cut, comb, and conversation. Folks said she had a gift for listening, and in a town Millfield's size, a hairdresser heard everything. Thomas Reynolds was different. He'd arrived in Millfield 9 months ago with his sister-in-law Maggie, renting Old Man Clancy's garage outside town. A former truck driver sidelined by a serious accident, people whispered with hollow eyes and a permanent furrow between his brows. He worked odd jobs, paid in cash, kept to himself. Sometimes at the general store his hands would shake for no reason, and he'd stare at nothing like he was seeing something the rest of them couldn't. Margaret Reynolds was a ghost of a woman. Thin wrists, oversized clothes, eyes too old for her 45 years. She rarely spoke above a whisper, if at all. But Dorothy Wilson, who lived nearby, swore she'd seen Maggie drawing in the dirt outside their garage, pictures so detailed and beautiful they'd break your heart. John Davidson had been Millfield's police chief for 23 years, a broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair and lines etched deep around his eyes. He coached Little League and had a 16-year-old son with autism. John understood struggling families. He also understood the line between struggle and neglect. He'd kept an eye on the Reynolds from a distance, sensing something wasn't right but never having cause to intervene. Until today. Dr. Sarah Collins ran the medical clinic in town with the efficiency of someone who'd seen it all and the compassion of someone who still cared deeply. At 40, with prematurely silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail, Dr. Collins was known for fighting insurance companies on behalf of patients and occasionally waiving fees for families who couldn't pay. The opioid crisis and healthcare cuts had hit Millfield hard, and she'd watched rural medicine deteriorate over her 15-year practice. These lives were about to collide in ways none of them could have anticipated, all because Emma Parker noticed something under a woman's hair that shouldn't have been there. The bell above Emma's salon door jingled as Dorothy Wilson stepped in, her gray hair tucked neatly beneath a knitted hat. At 75, Dorothy was Millfield's unofficial historian and self-appointed guardian of local children. Her shrewd eyes immediately assessed the tension in the room. "Morning, Emma," she called cheerfully. then paused at the sight of Maggie's reflection in the mirror. Lord have mercy. What's happened to that poor woman? Tom's face darkened. Mind your business, ma'am. Dorothy drew herself up to her full 5'2". When it comes to suffering, everyone with eyes to see has business being concerned. Maggie's small frame suddenly shuddered, a violent tremor running through her. Emma placed her hand on her forehead and felt the telltale heat of fever. She's burning up, she said, alarm rising in her voice. Mr. Reynolds, I'm calling Dr. Collins. Tom stepped forward, his movements jerky. No doctors. We're leaving. He reached for Maggie, but Emma stepped between them. This woman needs medical help, she insisted, meeting Tom's eyes directly. If you won't take her to the hospital, I will. Something dangerous flickered across Tom's face. You have no right. I have every right, Emma cut in, her voice steady but firm. As a medical professional and a human being. Dorothy moved closer to Maggie, her weathered hand resting protectively on the woman's shoulder. Tom Reynolds, I've known you since you came to town, and I know you care about Maggie. But sometimes caring means admitting when you're in over your head. Emma slipped her cell phone from her pocket and stepped toward the back room. I'm calling John. Tom lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. Don't you dare bring police into this. The sudden movement startled Maggie, who let out a small whimper, the first sound she'd made since arriving. The noise seemed to cut through Tom's anger, and he released Emma's arm as if burned. Tom, Maggie's voice was paper-thin. My head really hurts. Tom's face crumpled momentarily before hardening again. It's okay, Mags. We'll fix it at home. Emma met Dorothy's eyes over Maggie's head, a silent communication passing between them. Dorothy nodded almost imperceptibly and edged toward the phone on the counter. Mr. Reynolds, Emma tried again, gentler now. I was an ER nurse for 15 years before I took over this shop. What Maggie has isn't just going to go away. It's infected, and infections can spread to the bloodstream. That's dangerous, life-threatening dangerous. Something vulnerable flashed across Tom's face. I've been doing everything I can. I believe you, Emma said softly. But sometimes our best isn't enough. Sometimes we need help. The shop fell silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the old clock on the wall and Maggie's increasingly labored breathing. Outside, snow had begun to fall, delicate flakes dancing past the large front window. The stillness shattered as Maggie suddenly slumped forward in the chair, her small body convulsing. Emma caught her before she could hit the floor. She's seizing! She shouted, lowering her to the ground and turning her onto her side. Dorothy, call 911 now! Tom stood frozen, his face a mask of terror as his sister-in-law trembled on the salon floor. Dorothy was already at the phone, her voice clear and precise as she gave the dispatcher their location. Emma kept her fingers on Maggie's pulse, counting the rapid beats while murmuring reassurances to the unconscious woman. Temperature's too high, she explained to Tom, who had finally snapped out of his paralysis and dropped to his knees beside them. The infection's gone systemic. She needs emergency care. The fight seemed to drain from Tom all at once. Save her, he whispered, his voice breaking. Please. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as the ambulance approached. Emma kept one hand on Maggie's forehead, the other gripping Tom's arm. They're coming, she assured him. We caught it in time. But as Maggie's breathing grew more labored, her skin burning beneath Emma's palm, Emma wasn't sure that was true. What she'd seen beneath Maggie's hair spoke of weeks of neglect, not days. By the time the paramedics burst through the door, Maggie's lips had taken on a bluish tinge. John Davidson arrived seconds behind the ambulance, his cruiser skidding slightly on the freshly fallen snow. He took in the scene, paramedics working over the small woman, Tom kneeling beside her with haunted eyes. Emma giving the medical team a rapid-fire assessment in terminology that betrayed her nursing background. "What happened?" John asked Dorothy, who stood clutching her handbag to her chest. The elderly woman shook her head sadly. "What happens when folks get too proud or too scared to ask for help? That poor woman's been suffering a long time, John. Too long." As the paramedics lifted Maggie onto a stretcher, her small body seemed to disappear beneath the straps and blankets. One of them, Bill Jenkins, who'd gone to high school with Emma, called out vital signs that made her face tighten with concern. BP 9550, temperature 104.3, pulse 135, and thready. The emergency room at Millfield General Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos as Maggie was wheeled through the automatic doors. Dr. Sarah Collins met the gurney, her experienced eyes quickly assessing the small, trembling form before her. "What have we got?" she asked, falling into step beside the paramedics. 45-year-old female, severe scalp infection with possible malignant lesions, temp 104.3, had a seizure at the scene, Bill recited. BP's low, pulse rapid, and thready. Doctor. Collins lifted the bandage the paramedics had placed over Maggie's head and inhaled sharply. "Get her to trauma 2. I want a full blood panel, IV antibiotics, and cooling measures started immediately." Tom tried to follow, but a nurse gently blocked his path. "Sir, you need to stay in the waiting area while they work." "She's my sister-in-law," Tom protested weakly, his voice catching. John Davidson placed a steady hand on Tom's shoulder. "Let them do their job, Tom. Then we need to talk." Emma had followed in her own car, arriving just as Tom was being led to a small conference room off the ER waiting area. She caught John's eye, and he nodded slightly, an unspoken permission for her to join them. The conference room was claustrophobic. Beige walls, a scratched table, chairs that had seen better days. Tom sat with his head in his hands, looking smaller somehow, deflated. "I want to understand what happened," John began, his tone professional but not unkind. "How long has Maggie been sick?" Tom stared at his hands. "It started as just some scratching, maybe 2 weeks ago. I thought it was dry skin from the garage heater." "And you didn't think to take her to a doctor when it got worse?" John pressed. "Doctors?" Tom's mouth twisted. "Last time I trusted doctors, they pumped me so full of pills I couldn't feel anything. Couldn't even cry at Marie's funeral." Emma leaned forward. "Tom, I understand being wary, but Maggie's condition is serious. That infection didn't happen overnight." Tom's eyes flashed. "You think I don't know that? You think I wanted this?" His voice broke. "I've tried everything, every damn thing I know." "Everything except proper medical care," John pointed out. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Collins entered, her face grave. "Mr. Reynolds, we've started Maggie on IV antibiotics and fluids. The infection is severe. What we're seeing is concerning for multiple melanoma lesions on the scalp that have become severely infected." "In English, Doc?" John requested. "Maggie has what appears to be skin cancer that has spread across her scalp, and those lesions have become infected. The infection has entered her bloodstream, causing sepsis. That's what triggered the fever and seizure." Dr. Collins fixed Tom with a steady gaze. "I need to ask, has Maggie been exposed to any unusual environments recently? Contaminated water? Animal waste?" Tom swallowed hard. "We've been living at Clancy's old garage. The roof leaks in the back room where we sleep. There's some mold, but I've been cleaning it best I can." Dr. Collins nodded, making notes. "And her hygiene routine?" "We have to haul water from the creek. The garage's pump broke in December. I heat it on the wood stove, but it's not always—" Todd trailed off, the inadequacy of their living conditions hanging in the air. "I see, Doctor," Collins said neutrally. Mr. Reynolds, I'm obligated to inform you that I've contacted Adult Protective Services. The extent of Maggie's infection indicates prolonged neglect of her basic health needs. Tom lunged to his feet. Neglect? I've done everything I could. You have no idea. Tom, John interrupted firmly. Sit down. Surprisingly, Tom complied, collapsing back into his chair like a puppet with cut strings. She's all I have, he whispered. Dr. Collins's expression softened slightly. We're going to do everything we can for Maggie, but I need you to be honest with me about anything else that might be affecting her health. Silence stretched between them until Tom finally spoke, his voice barely audible. Sometimes I can't sleep for days. I hear things, see things. The garage. It gets to be too much, and I take Maggie to sleep in the truck. It's warmer there anyway. The admission hung in the air. John and Dr. Collins exchanged glances. When was the last time you saw your neurologist, Tom? John asked gently. 1.5 years ago before we came here. Tom's hands were trembling. The meds made everything worse. Couldn't work, couldn't think straight, couldn't protect Maggie. Emma, who had been silent, suddenly asked, Protect her from what? Tom looked up, his eyes haunted. From ending up like Marie. The name fell like a stone into still water. Who's Marie? John asked. But before Tom could answer, a nurse burst into the room. Dr. Collins, the patient's blood pressure is dropping. We need you now. Dr. Collins was out the door in an instant. Tom tried to follow, but John held him back. Let them work, Tom. I should be with her. Tom's voice rose in panic. Right now, the best thing you can do for Maggie is cooperate with us, John said firmly. Tom's shoulders slumped in defeat as John guided him back to his chair. Emma slipped out of the room, following the path Dr. Collins had taken. The trauma room was a flurry of activity. Maggie lay unconscious, her small frame dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding her. Dr. Collins barked orders as nurses moved with practiced efficiency. BP's 80/40 and falling. Push another bolus of fluids and start dopamine. Emma stood in the doorway, her nurse's training automatically cataloging the interventions, assessing Maggie's condition. It was bad, worse than she'd initially thought. The infection had clearly been festering for weeks, not days. Emma, I need you to step out, Dr. Collins called without looking up. Sarah, let me help. I was ER for 15 years. And now you're a witness in a potential elder abuse case, Dr. Collins interrupted. Please, wait outside. Reluctantly, Emma retreated to the hallway, where she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. The image of Maggie's infected scalp was burned into her memory, alongside the defeated look in Tom's eyes. Something about this situation felt different from the clear-cut neglect cases she'd seen as a nurse. John Davidson stood in the observation room of the Millfield police station, watching Tom Reynolds through the one-way glass. Tom sat at the metal table, staring at his folded hands, shoulders hunched as if bearing an invisible weight. He hadn't asked for a lawyer, hadn't made his phone call, hadn't done anything but ask about Maggie's condition every hour on the hour. "He say anything yet?" asked Deputy Mark Stevens, entering with 2 cups of coffee. John shook his head, accepting one of the cups. "Not since we booked him. Background check came back, though. Tom Reynolds, 47, former long-haul truck driver, honorable employment record until a serious accident in 2019. Traumatic brain injury from a highway collision. His wife, Marie Reynolds, died of breast cancer in 2020. Maggie Peterson, 45, is Marie's younger sister. She moved in to help Tom after Marie's death." "TBI explains a lot," Mark guessed. "Almost certainly," John confirmed. "Medical records show he was prescribed medication but stopped filling prescriptions about 18 months ago. That's when he and Maggie dropped off the grid. No fixed address, no medical records, nothing until they showed up here 9 months ago." John took a sip of coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. Time to see if he'll talk to me. Tom didn't look up when John entered the interrogation room, didn't acknowledge him until John placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. "How's Maggie?" Tom asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Stable," John replied, taking the seat across from him. "The doctors are doing everything they can." Tom nodded slightly, relief briefly softening his haggard features. "Can I see her?" "Not right now, Tom. You're in custody, and Maggie's in protective care." Tom's hands curled into fists, then slowly relaxed. "I never meant for her to get sick." "I believe you," John said. And he did. The despair in Tom's eyes wasn't the calculated remorse of an abuser caught in the act. It was the devastation of a man who'd failed at the one thing that mattered to him. But intent doesn't change the fact that your sister-in-law nearly died from a preventable infection. I need to understand how things got to this point. For a long moment, Tom remained silent. Then, as if a dam had broken, words began to spill out. "After Marie died, I couldn't—" Everything fell apart. The headaches, the hallucinations, feeling like I couldn't trust my own brain. Doctors said it was from the accident, but it just got worse. The meds made me feel like I was underwater. Couldn't protect Maggie that way, so we left. Just drove until the money ran out." Tom's voice was flat, emotionless. "Found the garage. Owner said we could stay if I did repairs. It was supposed to be temporary." "And about Maggie's health insurance?" Tom's jaw tightened. "Expired. Insurance company said her skin condition was a pre-existing condition because of some rash she had before we lost coverage. And do you know what the cost was? Over $300 just for an initial visit." The fluorescent lights of Millfield General cast harsh shadows across the waiting room as night settled over the small town. Emma sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, a cooling cup of vending machine coffee clutched between her hands. Across from her, Dorothy Wilson knitted steadily, the click of her needles providing a rhythmic counterpoint to the hospital's beeps and hums. "You should go home. Get some sleep," Dorothy said, without looking up from her work. "Sitting here won't make that woman heal any faster." Emma shook her head. "I can't leave her alone. She doesn't have anyone else right now." Dorothy's needles paused. "You hardly know that woman, Emma Parker. What's really keeping you here?" Before Emma could answer, Dr. Collins appeared in the doorway, looking exhausted. She'd been working on Maggie for nearly 6 hours. "How is she?" Emma asked, rising to her feet. "Stable for now," Dr. Collins replied, dropping into a chair beside them. "We've drained the worst infection sites and started her on a powerful cocktail of antibiotics. The next 48 hours will be critical." "Will there be permanent damage?" Dorothy asked, her needles still. Dr. Collins sighed. "It's too early to tell. We're monitoring for signs of septic shock or neurological complications from the high fever. She's malnourished and anemic too, which isn't helping her body fight the infection. But what concerns me most are the melanoma lesions. We've taken biopsies, but they appear advanced." "Can I see her?" Emma asked. "She's sedated," Dr. Collins replied. "But yes, briefly. She's been moved to ICU, room 212. As Emma turned to go, Dr. Collins caught her arm. "Emma, APS is sending someone first thing tomorrow. They'll want to talk to you as the reporting party." Emma nodded. "I'll be here." The ICU was dimly lit, the nurses moving quietly between rooms like ghosts. In room 212, Maggie lay still beneath a thin hospital blanket, her small chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Her head was partially shaved and bandaged, with drainage tubes emerging from beneath the gauze. An IV stand beside the bed delivered fluids and antibiotics, while monitors tracked her vital signs with muted beeps. Emma approached slowly, taking in the details. The hollows beneath Maggie's eyes, the chapped lips, the protruding collarbones visible above her hospital gown. How had she not noticed how thin Maggie was when she sat in her salon chair? How had no one in Millfield noticed this woman wasting away? "I'm sorry," she whispered, gently taking Maggie's limp hand. "I should have realized sooner." A nurse Emma recognized from her own hospital days, Angela Peterson, entered quietly to check Maggie's vitals. "Poor thing," Angela murmured. "Dr. Collins said she's been living in some abandoned garage in the middle of winter." "Clancy's old garage," Emma confirmed. "It's barely fit for weekend trips in summer, let alone winter living." Angela shook her head as she recorded Maggie's temperature. "The brother-in-law's in custody. John arrested him a few hours ago? Adult neglect charges. Well, from what I've seen of this infection, that's putting it mildly." Angela adjusted Maggie's blanket. "Dr. Collins had to scrape away necrotic tissue. Some of these infection sites go nearly to the skull. It's a miracle she didn't develop meningitis." Emma's stomach clenched. "Has she been conscious at all?" "In and out. She asked for Tom once, then went back under." Angela's expression softened. "Are you staying? I can bring an extra blanket." "That chair is not comfortable, but it reclines a bit." "I'm staying," Emma confirmed. After Angela left, Emma settled into the chair beside Maggie's bed. Outside the window, snow continued to fall, coating Millfield in a deceptive blanket of pristine white. Morning arrived with the shift change, bringing a flurry of activity to Maggie's room. Dr. Collins returned, accompanied by a tall, thin woman who introduced herself as Meredith Sawyer from Adult Protective Services. "Ms. Parker, I understand you're the one who reported the situation," Meredith said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, professional. "Could we speak privately?" They settled in a small consultation room where Emma recounted the previous day's events. Tom bringing Maggie for a haircut, discovering the infection, the confrontation, and Maggie's seizure. "And in your professional opinion as a former nurse, how long would it take for an infection to reach that stage?" Meredith asked, taking notes. "At least 2 weeks, probably longer," Emma replied. The pattern of infection suggested poor hygiene combined with some kind of environmental exposure, mold, contaminated water, something like that. "Had you noticed any previous signs of neglect in your interactions with Maggie or her brother-in-law?" Emma hesitated. "I'd only seen them a few times. Tom kept to himself. Maggie was quiet. Looking back, there were signs. She was too thin, her clothes were always too big, and she seemed wary, like she was expecting disappointment." Meredith nodded. "We're trying to locate any family members. Do you know if there's anyone else besides Tom?" "Tom never mentioned anyone. He did reference someone named Marie, though. Sounded like his late wife." "We'll look into it," Meredith said, closing her notebook. "In the meantime, Maggie will remain in protective custody. Once she's medically cleared, we'll need to assess her mental capacity and determine appropriate placement." The thought of Maggie being handed over to strangers made Emma's chest tighten. "What about Tom? Will he have any visitation rights?" "That depends on the court and the outcome of our investigation." Meredith's tone was neutral. "If you'll excuse me, I need to check with Dr. Collins about Maggie's prognosis." After Meredith left, Emma remained in the consultation room, a familiar weight settling in her stomach. She knew the system, had seen it work both miracles and tragedies during her nursing career. Sometimes removing a vulnerable adult from an unsafe home was the best possible outcome. Other times, the system inflicted its own kind of damage. A memory surfaced, her own experience with her ex-husband before the divorce. His refusal to waste money on doctors when she had pneumonia, insisting it was just a cold. By the time she'd defied him and driven herself to the ER, she'd been near respiratory failure. Her eyes snapped open as John approached. "They're booking Tom," he said quietly. "Adult neglect for now, pending Maggie's condition and the APS investigation." "John, I don't think this is straightforward neglect," Emma said. "There's something else going on here." John studied her face. "You're probably right. But right now, that woman in there is fighting for her life because her caretaker didn't get her basic medical care. That's all I need to know at the moment." A social worker Emma didn't recognize walked briskly past them toward the ICU, clipboard in hand. Through the door's window, Emma could see Dr. Collins nodding as a nurse shaved another portion of Maggie's scalp, revealing the full extent of the infection. "They'll be looking for next of kin," John said. "Does Tom have any family that you know of?" "He mentioned Marie, his wife, Maggie's sister. She died of breast cancer." John nodded. "I'll run a deeper background check. In the meantime," he hesitated. "Emma, I know that look. Don't get too involved. This isn't your fight." Emma thought of Maggie's silent suffering in her salon chair, of the way Tom had whispered, "She's all I have." "Maybe it should be somebody's," she replied. 3 days passed with Maggie drifting between consciousness and sedation. The powerful antibiotics were working. Her fever had dropped, the infection responding to treatment. But the biopsy results confirmed Dr. Collins's fears: stage 3 melanoma with multiple lesions across her scalp. Some had been there for months, perhaps longer. Emma divided her time between the salon and the hospital. She'd rescheduled clients, explaining there was a medical emergency, and most understood. Millfield was that kind of town. Dorothy had volunteered to help at the salon, answering phones and sweeping up hair, allowing Emma more time at Maggie's bedside. On the morning of the 4th day, Emma arrived to find Maggie awake, her gaze clearer than it had been since her admission. "Miss Emma," she whispered, recognizing her immediately. "The hair lady." Emma's heart leapt at this small victory. "That's right." "How are you feeling today?" "Head hurts less," Maggie replied, her voice raspy from disuse. "Where's Tom?" Emma hesitated, unsure how much to say. "He can't be here right now, but he's asking about you." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "He's in trouble because of me, isn't he?" "No, honey," Emma said gently, though it wasn't entirely true. "The important thing is that you're getting better." Maggie shook her head weakly. "You don't understand. Tom tried so hard. After Marie died, everything fell apart. The insurance, the bills, his head injury. Nobody would help us." "Head injury?" Emma prompted, though John had mentioned it. "Truck accident. 2 years before Marie got sick," Maggie explained, each word clearly an effort. "Metal plate in his skull. Makes him see things sometimes, hear things. The medicine helped, but after Marie died, we couldn't afford it anymore." Emma pulled her chair closer. "Tell me about Marie." Maggie's thin fingers plucked at the blanket. "My big sister. Breast cancer. They said they caught it early, but the insurance denied half the treatments. Experimental, they said. By the time they approved the right chemo, it was everywhere. The medical bills took everything: house, savings, Tom's truck. After she died, I moved in to help Tom." Emma listened as Maggie continued, her soft voice growing stronger as she spoke. The picture that emerged was far from simple neglect. After Marie's death, Tom's traumatic brain injury had worsened. Without medication, his paranoia increased. He became convinced doctors had deliberately misdiagnosed Marie to save money, that they'd experiment on Maggie, too. When Maggie developed a small rash on her scalp, Tom insisted on treating it himself with home remedies. "I should have insisted on seeing a doctor," Maggie admitted. "But we had no money, no insurance, and Tom was so scared. Then his hallucinations got worse. He started seeing bugs everywhere, thought they were crawling under my skin." "And you had nowhere else to go?" Emma asked gently. Maggie shook her head. "Our parents are gone. I lost my job as a school cafeteria worker when I missed too many days taking care of Marie. We tried the shelter in Augusta, but they couldn't handle Tom's episodes, so we just kept driving until we found Millfield." Why didn't you reach out for help here? We tried, Maggie's voice cracked. Went to the free clinic in Camden. They said I needed a specialist for the scalp condition, but the waiting list was 6 months long. Tom tried to get his medication refilled, but without insurance it was $400 a month. We tried the church food pantry, but Tom had an episode, started yelling about government spies. They asked us not to come back. Emma felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. This wasn't a simple case of neglect. It was a cascade of system failures, one stacked upon another. "Maggie, can I ask you something personal?" Emma ventured. "The spots on your scalp, how long had they been there before they got infected?" Maggie's gaze drifted to the window. "The first one showed up about a year ago. Just a dark spot, like a mole but flatter. I didn't think much of it. Then more appeared. They didn't hurt at first, just itched sometimes. Tom tried everything: aloe vera, tea tree oil, that drawing salve his grandmother used to make. A year." Emma closed her eyes briefly. A year of an advancing melanoma left untreated. "And when did it start getting worse?" she asked. "After we moved to the garage, about 2 months ago, I think. The spots started bleeding sometimes, and the itching got so bad I couldn't sleep. Tom would heat water from the creek and wash my hair, but it just kept getting worse. He wanted to try again with doctors, but by then I was afraid too." The door opened and Dr. Collins entered with a tablet in hand. She nodded to Emma, then turned to Maggie with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm glad to see you awake. How's the pain today? On a scale of 1 to 10? 4, maybe," Maggie replied. "Better than yesterday." "Good. The antibiotics are working well," Dr. Collins said, checking the monitors. "We need to discuss your test results and treatment options. Would you prefer to speak privately?" Maggie's hand found Emma's, squeezing weakly. "She can stay. I don't have any secrets anymore." Dr. Collins pulled up a chair on the opposite side of the bed. "The biopsies confirm what we suspected. You have multiple melanoma lesions. That's a serious form of skin cancer. Several have progressed to stage 3, which means they've grown deep into the skin, though we don't yet see evidence they've spread to other organs." Maggie received the news with eerie calm, as if she'd been expecting it. "Am I going to die like Marie?" "Not if we can help it, Dr. Collins said firmly. "But we need to move quickly. You'll need surgery to remove the lesions, followed by immunotherapy. It's an aggressive treatment plan, but given the stage and extent of the disease, it's your best option." "The cost?" Maggie asked immediately. Dr. Collins hesitated. "We'll have a financial counselor come speak with you about assistance programs. Let's focus on your health first." After Dr. Collins left, Maggie turned to Emma, her eyes filled with a resigned sadness that seemed far older than her 45 years. "They'll say the same thing they told Marie," she whispered. "Experimental treatment, not covered pre-existing condition. And now Tom can't even help me." "Maggie," Emma said, choosing her words carefully, "I know the system can be overwhelming. But you don't have to face this alone. There are resources, programs." "We tried all that," Maggie interrupted with unexpected sharpness. "For 2 years with Marie, we filled out every form, called every number, sat in every waiting room. Do you know what it's like to watch someone you love die while people shuffle papers? Tom does." Emma thought of her ER days, the patients who came in too late because they couldn't afford preventive care, the desperate families facing bankruptcy along with illness, the frustration of knowing treatments existed but remained out of reach for too many. "I want to see Tom," Maggie said suddenly. "Before any decisions, I need to see him." "I'll see what I can do," Emma promised, though she knew it wouldn't be simple with Tom in custody. When Emma left Maggie's room, she found John Davidson waiting in the hallway, his expression grave. "Talk to Maggie?" he asked. Emma nodded. It's not what we thought, John. Not simple neglect. Walk with me, he said, guiding her toward the hospital cafeteria. Once they had coffee, terrible hospital coffee, but hot at least, John pulled out a small notebook. I've been digging into the Reynolds background, he said. It's a mess, Emma. After Marie's cancer diagnosis, their insurance company, Heartland Health, denied coverage for a targeted therapy that might have saved her, claiming it was experimental. They fought it for months, won the appeal, but by then the cancer had metastasized. She died 6 weeks later. He flipped a page. They filed for medical bankruptcy, but not before losing their house in Rochester, New York. Tom's truck driving job had good benefits, but after his accident, he couldn't pass the physical. Short-term disability ran out, and long-term was denied based on an examiner's claim he could do light office work, despite documented traumatic brain injury with ongoing symptoms. Emma wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Maggie says they tried to get help. Looks that way, John agreed. I found records of them applying for assistance in 3 different states as they moved west. The problem was Tom's condition. His paranoia and outbursts made it difficult for them to stay in shelters or complete the application processes. Without a fixed address, they fell through every crack in the system. And Maggie's melanoma? That's where it gets even worse, John said, lowering his voice, though no one was nearby. When they still had insurance about 14 months ago, Maggie saw a dermatologist for a routine skin check. The doctor noted a suspicious lesion on her scalp, recommended a biopsy, but Heartland denied the procedure as not medically necessary at that time, said she could reapply in 6 months. Emma felt sick. By which time they'd lost their insurance entirely. Exactly. So that pre-existing condition the insurance company mentioned, they're the ones who prevented its diagnosis in the first place. The hospital cafeteria buzzed with activity around them. Staff grabbing quick meals, worried family members finding momentary distraction, but Emma barely noticed. Her mind was piecing together the timeline: Marie's death, the financial collapse, Tom's untreated brain injury, Maggie's denied diagnosis, their gradual descent into desperate poverty. This changes things, she said finally. Not legally, not yet, John cautioned. Tom still failed to get Maggie medical attention when she clearly needed it. His intentions may have been good, but nothing, Emma interrupted, an unusual anger flaring. The system failed them at every turn, John, every single turn. Tom was trying to protect Maggie the only way his injured brain could make sense of, after watching his wife die while fighting insurance denials. John studied her face. You're taking this personally. Damn right I am, Emma said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. It could be any of us, John. One accident, one illness, one denied claim away from exactly where they ended up. A new voice joined their conversation. Couldn't help overhearing. Mind if I join you? They looked up to see a woman in her 50s with short silver hair and keen eyes behind stylish glasses. She wore a hospital ID badge that identified her as Rachel Stevens, patient advocate. I've been following Maggie Peterson's case, Rachel said, pulling up a chair without waiting for an invitation. And I think there's something you both should know. Heartland Health is currently under investigation by the State Insurance Commissioner for systematically denying melanoma biopsies and treatments. Maggie's case isn't unique, it's part of a pattern. Emma and John exchanged glances. How do you know this? John asked. Because I used to work for them, Rachel replied grimly. I was a claims adjuster until I blew the whistle last year on their internal policies. They fired me, of course, but the investigation is ongoing. The evidence suggests they specifically targeted certain high-cost conditions for aggressive denial, melanoma among them. That's criminal, Emma said. It should be, Rachel agreed. But proving it is another matter. Individual cases like Maggie's get written off as unfortunate oversights or legitimate clinical disagreements. It's only when you see the pattern across hundreds of cases that the intentional nature becomes clear. John leaned forward. And how does this help Tom Reynolds right now? It changes the narrative, Rachel said simply. Instead of a neglectful caretaker, he becomes another victim of a predatory system, one that first denied his wife proper treatment, then his own brain injury care, then his sister-in-law's cancer diagnosis, until they were literally living in a garage with no running water. Emma felt a surge of hope. Would you be willing to testify to this? Rachel nodded. That's why I'm here. When I saw Maggie's name in the hospital system and the circumstances of her admission, I recognized the pattern immediately. I've been gathering documentation on similar cases for the investigation. Hers could be important. As Rachel outlined what she knew, Emma's mind raced ahead. Maybe there was a way to help both Maggie and Tom, to tell the true story of how they'd ended up in such desperate circumstances. It wouldn't be easy. The legal system preferred simple narratives of individual responsibility, not complex failures of multiple systems. But for the first time since finding those terrible lesions beneath Maggie's hair, Emma felt something like hope, not just for Maggie's medical recovery, but for some measure of justice. The county courthouse was imposing despite its small size, all polished wood and stern portraits of judges past. Emma sat in the back row of the courtroom, hands folded tightly in her lap. This was Tom Reynolds's arraignment, 1 week after Maggie's admission to the hospital, and the room was unexpectedly full. Dorothy Wilson, Dr. Collins, several nurses from the hospital, and a handful of townspeople Emma recognized from her salon. Judge Martha Henderson, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, called the court to order. Tom was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung from his frame, making him look even more diminished than when Emma had last seen him. His eyes scanned the room, widening slightly when he spotted Emma, before fixing on the floor again. District Attorney William Prescott stood, straightening his tie. Your Honor, the state is charging Thomas Reynolds with criminal neglect of a vulnerable adult, a felony carrying up to 10 years imprisonment. The defendant recklessly endangered his sister-in-law by failing to seek medical attention for her advanced skin cancer and severe infection, resulting in life-threatening sepsis. The public defender, a young woman named Sarah Jenkins, who looked barely out of law school, rose next. Your Honor, we request release on personal recognizance. Mr. Reynolds has no prior criminal record, has strong ties to the community, and poses no flight risk. He is the only family member of the alleged victim and needs to participate in medical decisions regarding her care. Judge Henderson peered over her reading glasses. Miss Jenkins, your client was living in an abandoned garage with no utilities. I'm not sure I'd call those strong ties to the community. Your Honor, Sarah continued undeterred, Mr. Reynolds suffers from a traumatic brain injury that has gone untreated due to financial hardship, not negligence. We request that the court consider ordering a mental health evaluation rather than continued detention. The judge turned to D.A. Prescott. Your response? The state opposes release, Your Honor. The defendant's sister-in-law nearly died from his neglect. His mental health issues, while unfortunate, make him a danger to her and potentially to himself. Judge Henderson considered for a moment. Mr. Reynolds, do you understand the charges against you? Tom looked up, his eyes clearer than Emma had seen them before. Yes, Your Honor. And do you understand that if convicted you face significant prison time? Yes, Your Honor. His voice was steady but hollow. But I need to see Maggie. She's all I have left. Something in his simple statement seemed to touch the judge. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. I'm ordering a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation at County General. Pending those results, Mr. Reynolds will remain in custody, but I'm authorizing supervised visits with his sister-in-law, provided her medical team approves." She looked directly at Tom. "Mr. Reynolds, this court takes the care of vulnerable adults very seriously, but I also recognize that there may be mitigating circumstances in your case." As the bailiff led Tom away, Emma caught his eye and nodded slightly, trying to convey that Maggie was okay, that she was fighting for him. Whether he understood, she couldn't tell. Outside the courtroom, Rachel Stevens waited, a thick folder under her arm. She'd been denied entry as a potential witness, but had been working tirelessly behind the scenes. "How did it go?" she asked as Emma emerged. "Better than expected," Emma replied. "The judge is ordering a psychiatric evaluation and allowing supervised visits with Maggie." "Good start," Rachel nodded. "Now we need to shift the narrative completely. I've been in touch with several other victims of Heartland's denial practices. 3 have agreed to speak about their experiences, including a former oncologist who quit after battling the insurance company too many times." Emma glanced at the thick folder. "Is that all evidence?" "Every denial, every appeal, every piece of correspondence between the Reynolds family and Heartland Health for the past 3 years, Rachel confirmed, plus internal memos from when I worked there showing the company's strategies for denying high-cost claims. Will it be enough?" Rachel's expression was grim but determined. To get Tom completely off? Probably not. To reduce the charges and focus attention where it belongs? I think so. But we need Maggie strong enough to tell her story. Back at the hospital, Emma found Maggie sitting up in bed, looking marginally better. The antibiotics had done their work. The infection was receding. But the cancer remained, and she would need surgery within days. "I saw Tom today," Emma said, settling into the chair beside the bed. "He's okay. The judge is allowing him to visit you with supervision." Tears filled Maggie's eyes. "Thank God. When?" "Soon," Emma promised. "Dr. Collins needs to approve it first." Maggie nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "The hospital financial counselor came by. They want to start surgery tomorrow, but—" She trailed off, staring at her hands. "What is it, Maggie?" "They explained the costs. Even with emergency Medicaid, which I might not qualify for, there would be thousands in out-of-pocket expenses." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I told them I refused treatment." Emma felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. "Maggie, no. This is treatable cancer, without surgery." "I know what happens without treatment," Maggie interrupted. "I watched Marie die, remember? But I won't leave Tom with more debt. He's suffered enough." Before Emma could respond, Dr. Collins entered, her face already set in disapproval. "Mrs. Peterson, we need to discuss your decision." "There's nothing to discuss," Maggie said with surprising firmness. "I've signed the form." Dr. Collins turned to Emma. "Perhaps we could have a moment alone?" Emma rose reluctantly. "I'll be right outside." In the hallway, Emma paced, her mind racing. She understood Maggie's decision on some level, the crushing weight of medical debt, the hopelessness of fighting a system that had already failed them repeatedly. But she couldn't accept it. There had to be another way. When Dr. Collins emerged 15 minutes later, her expression told Emma everything. "She won't budge," the doctor said quietly. "Legally, she's competent to refuse treatment. I've scheduled a psychiatric consult to confirm, but unless she's found incompetent, we have to respect her wishes." "This is insane," Emma said. "She's choosing to die because of money." "It happens more often than you'd think," Dr. Collins replied, the frustration evident in her voice. "I've seen patients refuse life-saving treatment rather than bankrupt their families. It's one of the ugliest parts of our system." Emma felt a sudden, fierce determination. "When is the psychiatric consult?" "Tomorrow morning. Dr. Bennett from County." Can you delay it, just by a day or two? Dr. Collins studied her. What are you planning, Emma? I need time to show Maggie there's another option, that she doesn't have to choose between her life and Tom's future. After a moment, Dr. Collins nodded. I can push it to Friday, but that's all the time I can give you. Her condition won't wait much longer. Emma spent the rest of the day on the phone, with Rachel Stevens, with John Davidson, with the public defender Sarah Jenkins, and finally with Judge Henderson's clerk, requesting an emergency hearing. By evening, she had cobbled together a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was the only chance they had. The next morning, Emma arrived at the hospital to find Maggie had a visitor, Dorothy Wilson, sitting beside the bed with her ever-present knitting. "Emma, dear," Dorothy greeted her. "I was just telling Maggie about the town meeting last night." "Town meeting?" Emma hadn't heard about any meeting. "Well, it wasn't official," Dorothy clarified. "More of a gathering at the community center. After word got out about Maggie's situation, people wanted to help." Maggie looked uncomfortable with the attention. "I told her it's not necessary. We've managed on our own this long. And look where that's got you," Dorothy said bluntly, but with kindness in her eyes. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is accept help when it's offered. Emma sat on Maggie's other side. "Dorothy's right. And speaking of help, I have news. Judge Henderson has agreed to an emergency hearing tomorrow. Rachel Stevens, she's a patient advocate who used to work for your insurance company, has evidence that could help Tom's case. But we need you there, Maggie. We need you to tell your story." Maggie shook her head. "I can barely walk to the bathroom, and what good would it do? The judge already decided." "This is different," Emma explained. "It's not about the criminal charges, not directly. It's about showing the court the bigger picture. About what really happened to you and Tom and Marie." "And how does that help us now?" Maggie asked, a rare flash of anger in her voice. "It doesn't change the cancer or the bills or Tom's brain injury." "It might," Emma said. "Rachel has contacted a medical rights attorney who's building a class action lawsuit against Heartland Health. Your case could be crucial evidence. If they settle, and Rachel thinks they will, to avoid publicity, it could cover your treatment costs. And Tom's care, too." For the first time, a flicker of hope crossed Maggie's face. Is that really possible?" "It's not guaranteed," Emma admitted. "But it's a fighting chance. Better than giving up." Maggie was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the winter sunlight sparkling on fresh snow. Finally, she turned back to Emma. "If I agree to this hearing, will they let Tom be there?" "I'm working on that," Emma promised. "John's talking to the sheriff right now about a supervised transport." Another long silence, then almost too quiet to hear. "Okay, I'll do it." Dorothy squeezed Maggie's hand. "That's the spirit, dear. Now, about your appearance in court. You can't go in that hospital gown. I've brought some things that might fit you, and I thought perhaps Emma might help with your hair." Despite everything, Maggie managed a small smile. What's left of it? Emma found herself smiling, too. "I'm a miracle worker with scissors, remember?" "We'll have you looking presentable by tomorrow." After Dorothy left, Emma helped Maggie to the bathroom where she carefully washed what remained of her hair. Much of it had been shaved for the drainage procedures, leaving an uneven patchwork. As Emma gently trimmed it into a more balanced style, Maggie studied her reflection in the mirror. "I look like a cancer patient," she said flatly. "You look like a survivor," Emma corrected. "Someone who's been through hell but is still standing." Maggie's eyes met Emma's in the mirror. "Why are you doing all this? You barely know us." The question caught Emma off guard. Why was she so invested in this case, in these people who had indeed been strangers just days ago? "I guess because it could have been me," she said finally. After my husband died, I was lost. If I hadn't had this town, my grandfather's shop to fall back on, I don't know where I would have ended up." Maggie nodded, understanding. Community. That's what we lost when Marie got sick. Our neighbors helped at first, but cancer is a marathon, not a sprint. People get tired of helping after a while. Not all people, Emma said. Not all communities. The morning of the hearing dawned bright and cold. Emma arrived at the hospital early to find Dr. Collins already in Maggie's room, performing a final check. "Blood pressure's a bit low, but that's to be expected," the doctor said, making notes in the chart. "I've arranged for a hospital transport to take you to the courthouse. A nurse will accompany you to monitor your condition." "And if I get worse?" Maggie asked. "Then we bring you straight back," Dr. Collins said firmly. "This hearing is important, but your health comes first." When Dr. Collins left, Emma helped Maggie dress in clothes Dorothy had brought. A simple blouse and cardigan that hung from her thin frame, but looked infinitely better than a hospital gown. As Emma fastened the small buttons, her fingers brushed against Maggie's collarbone, so prominent beneath her skin. "You're going to get through this," Emma said, as much to reassure herself as Maggie. "Both the hearing and the treatment afterward." Maggie caught her hand. "I haven't agreed to the treatment yet." "I know," Emma acknowledged. "But after today, I hope you will." The courtroom was even more crowded than for Tom's arraignment. News of the emergency hearing had spread through Millfield like wildfire, and it seemed half the town had shown up. Rachel Stevens sat at a table with Sarah Jenkins and a distinguished-looking man Emma didn't recognize, presumably the medical rights attorney. District Attorney Prescott looked annoyed at the unexpected proceedings, shuffling papers and whispering to his assistant. When Tom was led in, his eyes immediately found Maggie, who sat in a wheelchair at the front of the gallery. The naked emotion on his face was painful to witness. Relief, guilt, fear, love, all warring for dominance. "All rise," the bailiff called, and Judge Henderson entered, looking slightly puzzled at the packed courtroom. "Be seated," she said, settling behind the bench. "This is an unusual proceeding. I've agreed to hear additional evidence in the State versus Reynolds case based on Ms. Jenkins' petition, citing new information relevant to both the defendant's mental state and the circumstances leading to the alleged neglect." She looked over her glasses at the defense table. "You may proceed." Sarah Jenkins stood. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'd like to call Rachel Stevens as our first witness." For the next hour, Rachel methodically laid out the evidence she'd gathered, internal memos from Heartland Health showing policies designed to deny claims, statistics on rejection rates for melanoma treatments, and finally, the specific timeline of the Reynolds family's struggle. Marie's denied treatments, Tom's rejected disability claims, Maggie's refused diagnostic biopsy. As she spoke, Emma watched the judge's expression shift from skepticism to concern to something approaching anger. When Rachel finished, Judge Henderson turned to D.A. Prescott. "Your cross-examination, counselor?" Prescott seemed at a loss. "Your Honor, while this information about insurance practices is certainly troubling, it doesn't change the fact that Mr. Reynolds failed to seek medical attention for his sister-in-law when she clearly needed it." "Perhaps our next witness can address that specific point," Sarah said. "The defense calls Margaret Peterson." A court officer wheeled Maggie to the witness stand. After she was sworn in, Sarah approached gently. "Mrs. Peterson, could you tell the court about your relationship with the defendant?" Maggie's voice was soft but steady as she described the past 3 years, Marie's illness and death, Tom's deteriorating mental condition, their gradual descent into poverty and isolation. The courtroom was utterly silent as she recounted their failed attempts to get help, the insurance denials, the waiting lists, the impossible choices. "We did try to get medical help," she emphasized. 3 different clinics, but without insurance they wanted payment up front. Hundreds of dollars we didn't have. One place offered a payment plan, but it required a credit card. Ours had been maxed out and closed during Marie's illness. And your brother-in-law's mental state during this time? Sarah prompted. Getting worse, Maggie admitted. The headaches were constant. He'd have episodes where he'd forget where he was or think he was back in the hospital after his accident. Sometimes he'd be convinced people were trying to hurt us, especially doctors. Her voice broke slightly. But even on his worst days, he tried to take care of me. He'd heat water to wash my hair, apply the medicines he could make or afford, give me his food when we were short. Judge Henderson leaned forward. Mrs. Peterson, given Mr. Reynolds' condition, why didn't you seek help independently? Maggie met the judge's gaze directly. Because he's my family, Your Honor, the only family I have left. After watching what happened to Marie, how the system failed her at every turn, I didn't trust it either. And I was afraid they'd lock Tom away somewhere, afraid I'd end up alone on the street. When Maggie finished testifying, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even D.A. Prescott seemed moved, his cross-examination perfunctory and brief. The medical rights attorney, Michael Donovan, presented next, explaining the broader context of Heartland Health's practices and the pending class action lawsuit. He was followed by Dr. Harmon, the psychiatrist who had evaluated Tom, who testified about the effects of untreated traumatic brain injury on decision-making and perception. As the final witness, Dr. Collins took the stand, explaining the medical realities of Maggie's condition, both the treatable nature of her cancer if she accepted care and the dire consequences if she continued to refuse. And in your professional opinion, Sarah asked, would Mrs. Peterson be more likely to accept life-saving treatment if she knew her brother-in-law was receiving proper care rather than facing criminal charges? Without question, Dr. Collins replied. Her primary concern has been his welfare, even at the cost of her own health. When all testimony concluded, Judge Henderson called a brief recess. The courtroom buzzed with conversation as she left. Townspeople discussing what they'd heard, reporters from the local paper scribbling notes. Emma made her way to Maggie, who looked exhausted but somehow lighter, as if telling her story had lifted a weight. You did brilliantly, Emma told her, squeezing her hand. Maggie managed a tired smile. Did it help Tom? I think so, Emma said. The judge seemed moved. But whatever happens, you told the truth. That matters. When Judge Henderson returned, the courtroom fell silent. She surveyed the packed room before speaking. This case has revealed disturbing failures on multiple levels: healthcare access, insurance practices, mental health services, and community support systems. While the court cannot remedy all these systemic issues, I can address the specific matter before me. She turned to Tom, who stood with his head bowed. Mr. Reynolds, your sister-in-law's testimony makes clear that your actions, while legally constituting neglect, were not malicious, but the result of your own untreated condition and desperate circumstances. The judge shuffled some papers, then continued. I am therefore ordering the following. The felony charges are reduced to a misdemeanor, with sentencing deferred pending completion of a supervised mental health treatment program. You will be released to a residential treatment facility rather than jail, where you will receive proper care for your traumatic brain injury. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Emma felt tears pricking her eyes as she watched Tom's shoulders sag in relief. Additionally, Judge Henderson continued, I am appointing a court guardian to oversee both Mr. Reynolds' treatment and Mrs. Peterson's medical decisions for a period of 6 months, after which their capacity will be reassessed. She looked directly at Maggie. Mrs. Peterson, this court strongly encourages you to accept the medical treatment you need. Your life has value, not just to your brother-in-law, but to this community which has come today to support you both. As the judge concluded the hearing, the courtroom erupted in conversation. Tom was allowed a brief, supervised moment with Maggie before being led away to be transferred to the treatment facility. He knelt beside her wheelchair, taking her hands in his. "I'm so sorry, Mags," he whispered. "I thought I was protecting you." "I know," she said, touching his cheek. "Now we both need to get better." "Promise me you'll take your medicine, do what the doctors say?" He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I promise. And you'll fight this cancer? No more giving up?" For the first time since Emma had known her, Maggie's smile reached her eyes. "I promise." As Tom was led away, Emma felt a presence beside her. John Davidson stood watching the scene, his expression thoughtful. "You did good," he said quietly. "Changed the outcome completely." "We all did," Emma corrected. "Rachel, Sarah, Dr. Collins, Dorothy, everyone who spoke up." John nodded. "That's how community is supposed to work." He hesitated. "The residential facility they're sending Tom to, it's good but expensive. Even with the court order, there will be costs not covered." Emma had been thinking the same thing. Dorothy mentioned a town meeting. Maybe that's where we start. They looked over at Maggie, now surrounded by townspeople offering support and encouragement. For the first time since that terrible moment in the salon, Emma felt real hope, not just for Maggie and Tom, but for Millfield itself, a community remembering how to take care of its own. 2 weeks after the hearing, Emma stood outside the operating room at Millfield General, waiting as Dr. Collins and her team performed Maggie's surgery. The procedure was extensive, removing multiple melanoma lesions from her scalp, followed by skin grafts to cover the affected areas. It had already been 3 hours, and the nurse had said to expect at least 2 more. Dorothy sat beside her, knitting needles clicking steadily as she worked on what appeared to be a soft cap. "For when she's recovering," Dorothy explained, noticing Emma's glance. "Scalp will be sensitive for months." Emma nodded, grateful for the older woman's practical kindness. The waiting area was surprisingly full. John Davidson had stopped by during his lunch break. Rachel Stevens was working on her laptop in the corner, and 3 women from Emma's church sat quietly talking among themselves. "Any word from the treatment center about Tom?" Dorothy asked, not looking up from her knitting. "He's responding well to the medication," Emma replied. "The doctor says his lucid periods are getting longer. He asks about Maggie every day." Dorothy nodded approvingly. "That's a good sign. A mind can heal, same as a body, given the right care." Emma wasn't as certain. The psychiatrist at Pinewood Treatment Center had been cautiously optimistic about Tom's prognosis, but had warned that traumatic brain injuries often resulted in permanent changes to personality and cognitive function. The goal wasn't necessarily to return Tom to who he'd been before the accident, but to help him manage his symptoms and develop coping strategies for the damaged neural pathways. The waiting room door opened, and Rachel approached them, her expression grave. "Just got off the phone with Michael Donovan. The judge granted Heartland's motion to seal many of the internal documents we submitted as evidence." "What does that mean for the lawsuit?" Emma asked. Rachel sighed, removing her glasses to rub her eyes. "It complicates things. Michael's still confident we have a strong case, but it might take longer than we hoped. The company's lawyers are fighting every step of the way." The news settled heavily in Emma's stomach. The class action lawsuit against Heartland Health was their best hope for covering Maggie's mounting medical expenses. The surgery alone would cost tens of thousands, and the immunotherapy treatments to follow were even more expensive. While emergency Medicaid had been approved, it would cover only a portion of the total. "How much time do we have?" Emma asked quietly. "Before the bills come due?" "The hospital's given a 90-day grace period," Rachel replied. "After that, they'll expect payment arrangements." Dorothy's knitting needles paused. "What about the fundraiser? How are we doing with that?" The fundraiser had been Dorothy's idea, a community effort to help cover the expenses that insurance and Medicaid wouldn't. The town had rallied surprisingly well, with local businesses donating items for a silent auction and volunteers organizing a benefit dinner at the church hall. "Almost 8,000 so far," Emma said. "It's amazing, but nowhere near enough," Rachel finished for her. "The immunotherapy alone will be about 15,000 per treatment, even after Medicaid, and she'll need at least 4 rounds." The stark numbers hung in the air between them. Millfield was a small town with modest resources, already stretched thin by the ongoing opioid crisis and economic downturn. Their generosity was heartwarming but ultimately insufficient against the mammoth costs of modern cancer treatment. "There has to be another way," Emma insisted, though she couldn't imagine what it might be. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text message. She checked it, then looked up with a frown. "Reporter from the Portland Press-Herald wants to interview Maggie once she's recovered enough. Apparently, our little courthouse drama has caught some attention." "Is that good or bad?" Dorothy asked. "Could be both," Rachel admitted. "Media attention might pressure Heartland to settle the lawsuit faster, but it could also make them dig in their heels. And it puts Maggie and Tom in the spotlight, which they might not want." Before Emma could respond, Dr. Collins appeared in the doorway, still wearing her surgical cap but having removed her gown. Her expression was unreadable as she approached them. "The surgery is complete," she said, settling heavily into a chair across from Emma. "We removed all visible lesions and sent samples for pathology. The skin grafts are in place." "But," Emma prompted, sensing there was more. Dr. Collins sighed. "We found something concerning during the procedure. There's evidence the cancer may have spread beyond what we could see on the initial scans. I've ordered additional imaging once Maggie is stable enough." The floor seemed to drop away beneath Emma's feet. "Spread where?" "Potentially to the lymph nodes in her neck, possibly beyond. We won't know for certain until we get the pathology results and complete the imaging." Dorothy's hand found Emma's, squeezing tightly. "What does this mean for her treatment plan?" "If confirmed, we'll need to adjust our approach," Dr. Collins explained. "More aggressive immunotherapy, possibly radiation, and the prognosis would shift from potentially curable to—" she hesitated. "Manageable, but not curable," Emma finished, her nursing background filling in the words the doctor was reluctant to say. Dr. Collins nodded grimly. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We need the test results first." "When will she wake up?" Emma asked. "We're keeping her sedated for now." "Probably tomorrow morning." Dr. Collins stood. "I need to check on another patient, but I'll update you when she's moved to recovery." After the doctor left, a heavy silence fell over their small group. Dorothy resumed her knitting, though Emma noticed her hands weren't quite steady. Rachel had returned to her corner, already typing rapidly on her laptop, likely updating the legal team. "She's a fighter," Dorothy said finally. "Our Maggie. Survived this long against all odds." Emma nodded, though the knot in her throat made it difficult to speak. In the short time she'd known Maggie Peterson, she'd come to deeply admire the woman's quiet resilience. Despite everything life had thrown at her, her sister's death, poverty, her own illness, Tom's condition, Maggie had maintained a dignity and gentleness that seemed almost miraculous. The next morning found Emma back at the hospital, having barely slept. Maggie had been moved to the ICU overnight, her vital signs stable but requiring close monitoring. Her head was completely bandaged, with drains in place to prevent fluid buildup under the skin grafts. Various tubes and wires connected her to monitors and IV medications, making her seem small and fragile in the hospital bed. Dr. Collins met Emma outside the room. "She's starting to wake up. The anesthesia is wearing off, but she's on strong pain medication, so she'll be groggy." "Has she been told about the findings during surgery?" "Not yet," Dr. Collins replied. "I wanted her to be more alert for that conversation. And honestly, I'd prefer to have the imaging results first, so we can discuss next steps at the same time." Emma nodded. "When will those be done?" "We've scheduled a PET scan for tomorrow morning. Results should be available by afternoon." Inside the room, Maggie's eyes fluttered open as Emma approached the bed. Recognition dawned slowly in her gaze. "Emma," she whispered, voice raspy from intubation during surgery. "I'm here," Emma said, gently taking her hand, careful not to disturb the IV. "The surgery's over. You did great." Maggie's fingers twitched in Emma's grasp. "My head feels strange." "That's the bandages and medication. Dr. Collins said everything went well with the procedure." It wasn't entirely a lie, Emma reasoned. The surgery itself had been successful. They had removed what they could see. The potential spread was a separate issue, one that Maggie would need to face soon enough. "Tom?" Maggie asked, her eyelids already growing heavy again. "He's doing well at the treatment center. Sends his love. He's really proud of you for fighting." A ghost of a smile touched Maggie's lips before she drifted back to sleep. Emma stayed beside her, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor providing an oddly comforting backdrop. A soft knock at the door announced John Davidson's arrival. He entered quietly, nodding to Emma as he placed a small potted plant on the windowsill. "How is she?" he asked, his voice low. "Stable," Emma replied. "In and out of consciousness." John studied Maggie's sleeping form, his expression troubled. "I just came from Pinewood. Visited Tom." "How did he seem?" "Better than I expected," John admitted. "The medication is helping. He's more present, less paranoid. But when he heard about Maggie's surgery, he got agitated. Kept saying he needed to be with her, that she needed him." Emma sighed. "She does miss him. Asks about him every time she's awake." John hesitated. "The treatment centers agreed to a supervised visit once Maggie's strong enough, maybe next week if her recovery stays on track." "That would mean a lot to both of them," Emma said. Then, noticing John's troubled expression hadn't eased, "What is it?" "Something else about Tom?" John pulled up a chair beside her. "While I was there, Tom told me something disturbing. Last year, when they still had their apartment in Augusta, Maggie did see a doctor about the first spots on her scalp. The doctor wanted to do a biopsy immediately, said it looked suspicious. But I thought Heartland denied the procedure." "They did," John confirmed, "but there's more to it. According to Tom, the doctor offered to do the biopsy anyway, bill it under a different code that insurance might cover. But the office required a $300 deposit." Emma felt sick. Money they didn't have. John nodded grimly. "Tom says he tried everything. Sold his wedding ring, some tools, even donated plasma twice weekly for a month. But between rent and food, he could only save about half the amount. By the time he had enough, the spot had grown, and there were more of them. When they went back, the doctor said it looked worse and referred them to an oncologist. Another appointment, another bill they couldn't afford. The story was all too familiar to Emma from her nursing days. Patients caught in an impossible cycle, unable to afford preventive care until their condition became an emergency, by which point treatment was both more difficult and more expensive. "Does Rachel know this?" she asked. "It could be important for the lawsuit." "I called her on my way here," John replied. "She's looking into it. Said it might actually strengthen their case. Shows a direct line between the insurance denial and Maggie's worsening condition." Their conversation was interrupted by a nurse entering to check Maggie's vitals. As she worked, Emma watched Maggie's face, peaceful in medicated sleep, unaware of the additional challenges that awaited her when she woke. The following afternoon brought the news they'd been dreading. Emma sat with Dr. Collins in a small consultation room, staring at the imaging results displayed on a tablet. Even to Emma's trained eye, the small bright spots in Maggie's neck and chest were unmistakable. The cancer had indeed spread. "Stage 4?" Emma asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Collins nodded solemnly. The melanoma has metastasized to lymph nodes in her neck, and there are small lesions in her lungs. We won't know about her brain until we complete the MRI, but given the pattern of spread, it's a possibility. Emma closed her eyes briefly, trying to process what this meant. Stage 4 melanoma was treatable but rarely curable. The 5-year survival rate was less than 30%, even with the most advanced therapies. What's the treatment plan? Aggressive immunotherapy is our best option, Dr. Collins explained. It's shown promising results in cases like Maggie's, combined with targeted radiation for the larger metastases. But I want to be clear, this is about extending her life and improving its quality, not curing the disease. Emma nodded, a lump forming in her throat. And without treatment? Dr. Collins' expression was grave. 6 months, maybe less. With treatment, potentially years. There are patients who've survived a decade or more, but it's not a guarantee. The cost? Emma forced herself to ask. The immunotherapy drugs alone run about $30,000 per treatment cycle, 4 to 6 cycles minimum. Some portion will be covered by emergency Medicaid, but there will still be significant out-of-pocket expenses. The numbers were staggering, impossible for someone in Maggie's position. Even with the community fundraiser and potential settlement from the lawsuit, the financial burden seemed insurmountable. Has she been told yet? Emma asked. No, Dr. Collins replied. I wanted to discuss the approach with you first, since you've become her de facto advocate. She trusts you. The responsibility felt overwhelming. She should hear it from you as her doctor, but I'll be there with her. There's something else, Dr. Collins added hesitantly. Given the advanced stage and Maggie's overall condition, she would be eligible for a clinical trial at Dana-Farber in Boston, a new combination therapy that's showing remarkable results in early studies. Emma felt a flicker of hope. Would that be covered? The trial? The experimental drugs would be, yes, but not travel, accommodation, or the standard of care treatments that accompany the trial, and she would need someone with her. These are powerful drugs with potentially serious side effects. The hope dimmed as quickly as it had appeared. Boston was hours away. Maggie had no one who could stay with her for weeks or months of treatment. No resources for even the most basic expenses such a trial would entail. I'll present all options when I speak with her, Doctor, Collins said, gathering her materials. But I wanted you to be prepared. This won't be an easy conversation. Together, they returned to Maggie's room. She was awake now, sitting up slightly, her bandaged head propped against pillows. Dorothy was beside her, reading aloud from a magazine, but stopped when they entered. Dr. Collins pulled up a chair directly in Maggie's line of sight. With gentle but straightforward words, she explained the imaging results, the stage 4 diagnosis, and the treatment options. Emma watched Maggie's face carefully as she absorbed the news, the initial shock, followed by a resigned sadness that was somehow more heartbreaking than tears would have been. So, even with treatment, I won't be cured? Maggie asked quietly. It's unlikely, Dr. Collins acknowledged. But modern therapies can extend life significantly, often with good quality of life for much of that time. Maggie was silent for a long moment. And the clinical trial you mentioned? Better odds with that? Potentially, yes. The early results are promising, but it would mean relocating to Boston for at least 3 months, possibly longer. Another long silence. Then, I need to think, and I need to talk to Tom before I decide anything. Dr. Collins nodded. Of course. Take the time you need, but we should start some form of treatment within the next 2 weeks for the best results. After the doctor left, Dorothy quietly excused herself, leaving Emma alone with Maggie. The room was silent except for the soft beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital corridor. "I always knew somehow," Maggie finally said, her voice steady despite everything. "Even before we came to Millfield, I could feel it changing inside me." "Why didn't you insist on seeing a doctor sooner?" Emma asked gently. Maggie's smile was sad. After what happened with Marie, watching her suffer through treatments that came too late anyway, seeing what it did to Tom, she shook her head slightly. And the money. Always the money. Every decision, every day, shaped by what we could or couldn't afford. Emma took her hand, not knowing what to say. What comfort could she possibly offer in the face of such a bleak diagnosis, such impossible circumstances? "Would you do something for me?" Maggie asked suddenly. "Anything." "If I decide on the clinical trial, would you tell Tom for me? Explain why I need to go to Boston? I'm afraid he won't understand, that he'll think I'm abandoning him." The request caught Emma off guard. "Of course, but Maggie, how would you manage in Boston? The logistics? The expenses?" "I don't know," Maggie admitted. "But if it's my only real chance—" She trailed off, looking out the window at the winter afternoon, the sun already beginning to set, though it was only 4 o'clock. "I've spent 3 years watching life slip away. First Marie, then Tom's mind, then our security, our home. I don't want to just surrender what time I have left without a fight." Something in her quiet determination broke Emma's heart and steeled her resolve at the same time. Maggie deserved that fight, deserved every possible chance. But the barriers seemed insurmountable: financial, logistical, emotional. Later that evening, as Emma drove home through Millfield's quiet streets, her mind raced with possibilities, most of them impractical or insufficient. The community fundraiser, while touching, would barely make a dent in the expenses. The lawsuit might eventually provide a settlement, but not in time for the treatment Maggie needed now. Government assistance programs had already been maxed out with emergency Medicaid. As she pulled into her driveway, Emma made a decision. She couldn't solve all of Maggie's problems, couldn't cure her cancer or fix the broken healthcare system that had failed her at every turn, but perhaps, with help, she could make the clinical trial possible. The next morning, she arrived at the hospital with a proposal that had kept her up most of the night. Maggie was sitting up, looking slightly stronger, though the dark circles under her eyes spoke of a restless night. "I've been thinking about the Boston trial," Emma said without preamble. "I want to help make it happen." Maggie shook her head. "Emma, I appreciate everything you've done, but this is too much to ask." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Emma sat on the edge of the bed. "I have a cousin in Cambridge with a spare room. I've already called her, and she's willing to let you stay there during the initial treatment. It's not far from Dana-Farber. But the other expenses, transportation, daily costs, someone to help me, we'll figure it out," Emma insisted. "Dorothy's already organizing a schedule of volunteers who could take turns accompanying you. Rachel thinks she can get a patient advocacy group to cover some of the transportation costs. And John's talking to the VFW about helping, given Tom's connection to Marie's military service." Maggie stared at her, tears welling in her eyes. "Why would everyone do this? Go to such lengths for strangers?" "You're not strangers anymore," Emma said simply. "You're part of Millfield now. And this is what community means. Not just small kindnesses when it's easy, but showing up when it's hard." For the first time since her diagnosis, Maggie allowed herself to cry, silent tears tracking down her pale cheeks. Emma held her hand, letting her process the overwhelming emotions, grief for what she'd lost, fear of what lay ahead, but perhaps also a fragile hope that had seemed impossible just days before. "I need to talk to Tom first," Maggie said finally, wiping her eyes. "I won't leave him without explaining. John's arranged for him to visit tomorrow," Emma assured her. "Supervised but private. You'll have time together." Maggie nodded, seeming to gather strength from the prospect. Then I'll decide after I see him. As Emma left the hospital that afternoon, a text message from Rachel Stevens appeared on her phone. "Call me ASAP. Big development in the lawsuit." Emma called Rachel from the hospital parking lot, hands trembling slightly as she pressed the phone to her ear. "What's happened?" she asked, foregoing any greeting. "A whistleblower," Rachel replied, her voice vibrating with barely contained excitement. "Someone high up at Heartland Health came forward this morning, a vice president of claims management." Emma's breath caught. "With what?" "Everything, Emma. Internal memos directing reviewers to automatically deny melanoma biopsies and treatments on first submission. Training materials teaching staff how to find technicalities for denial. Statistics showing they rejected 86% of melanoma claims initially, knowing most patients wouldn't appeal." Emma leaned against her car, legs suddenly weak. "And Maggie's case specifically? They had her in their system as a watch list patient after Marie's expensive cancer treatment." The whistleblower confirmed they flagged family members of high-cost claimants for extra scrutiny. The deliberate coldness of it, targeting a woman because her sister had been expensive to treat, made Emma's stomach turn. "Will this help the lawsuit?" "Help it! This blows it wide open. Michael's already reached out to Heartland's lawyers. They're suddenly very interested in settlement discussions." Hope flared in Emma's chest. "How soon? And how much?" "Too early to say specifics, but Michael thinks weeks rather than months, and he's pushing for full coverage of medical expenses for all affected patients, plus additional damages." Rachel paused. "This might actually work out, Emma, not just for Maggie, but for hundreds of patients like her." Emma closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of relief. It wasn't a cure for Maggie's cancer, but it could remove the crushing financial burden, give her the freedom to focus solely on treatment and recovery. "There's something else," Rachel continued. "The Portland Press-Herald is running a front-page story tomorrow. They got wind of the whistleblower. This is going national, Emma. Michael's already had calls from the New York Times and CNN. Have you told Maggie yet?" "No, I wanted to talk to you first. This will bring attention she might not want." Emma thought of Maggie's quiet dignity, her reluctance to be a burden or center of attention. "Let me talk to her. She should hear it from someone she trusts before it's all over the news." When Emma returned to Maggie's hospital room, she found her sitting up, looking through a brochure about the Boston clinical trial. The determined set of her jaw told Emma she'd been seriously considering the possibility. "You're back," Maggie observed, setting the brochure aside. "Did you forget something?" Emma pulled a chair close to the bed. "No, I have news." About the lawsuit against Heartland Health. Carefully, she explained what Rachel had told her, the whistleblower, the damning evidence, the potential settlement. As she spoke, Maggie's expression shifted from disbelief to shock to a complex mixture of vindication and sorrow. "So they did it on purpose," she said when Emma finished. "Denied me because of Marie's treatment, denied Tom's medication. It wasn't just bureaucracy or bad luck." "No," Emma confirmed gently. "It was deliberate corporate policy." Maggie was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "Will this help Tom, too? Cover his treatment?" "Rachel thinks so, yes. As Marie's primary caregiver and your caretaker, he was directly affected by their practices." Another long silence. Then, unexpectedly, Maggie laughed, a short, harsh sound with little humor in it. "Marie always said the system was rigged against people like us. Not poor enough for full government help, not rich enough to pay our way. Turns out she was right in ways even she didn't imagine." Emma reached for her hand. "The lawsuit won't bring Marie back. It won't erase what you and Tom have been through. But it might make things right from here forward. Proper treatment for both of you, without financial ruin." And others too? Maggie asked. Other patients like us? Hundreds, maybe thousands. Rachel says the settlement will likely include policy changes, independent oversight of Heartland's practices. Maggie nodded slowly, absorbing this. Good. That matters. She picked up the clinical trial brochure again. This changes things. If the settlement covers Tom's care long term, I could go to Boston without worrying about abandoning him. That's right, Emma confirmed. And the settlement might cover expenses the trial doesn't. Housing, transportation, caregivers. When will Tom visit? I need to discuss this with him. Tomorrow at 11. John's bringing him from Pinewood. Maggie's fingers traced the edges of the brochure. Will you be here? Not for the private part, but after. Tom might have questions I can't answer about the lawsuit or the trial. Of course, Emma promised. Whatever you need. The next morning dawned clear and cold, sunlight glinting off fresh snow. Emma arrived at the hospital early, finding Dorothy already in Maggie's room, helping her prepare for Tom's visit. The older woman had brought clothes from home, a simple blouse and cardigan that hung loosely on Maggie's thin frame, but looked infinitely better than a hospital gown. Let me help with your hair, Emma offered, noticing Maggie struggling with a small comb, trying to arrange what remained of her hair around the bandages. Not much to work with, Maggie said ruefully. They had to shave most of it for the surgery. Emma gently took the comb. We'll make it work. And it'll grow back stronger during your treatment. As Emma carefully styled what she could, applying a light touch of makeup Dorothy had brought, she noticed Maggie's hands trembling slightly. Nervous about seeing Tom? She asked quietly. Maggie nodded. It's been weeks. I don't know what to expect. John says the medication is helping, but he's still Tom, Emma finished for her. Still the man who's been through everything with you, who loves you. What if he can't understand about Boston, about the clinical trial? In his bad moments, he gets so fixated on us staying together, being safe. Dorothy patted Maggie's shoulder. You just tell him the truth, dear. That's all any of us can do. At 11 precisely, John arrived with Tom. The transformation was subtle but significant. Tom stood straighter, his eyes clearer, his movements less jerky than Emma remembered. He'd gained a little weight and someone had given him a proper haircut. The haunted look hadn't entirely left his face, but it had receded. Maggie, he breathed, stopping in the doorway as if afraid to approach. Tom, she replied, her voice catching. Come in. It's okay. Emma and Dorothy slipped out, giving them privacy for their reunion, but not before Emma saw Tom cross to the bed and carefully, tenderly embrace his sister-in-law, mindful of her bandages and IV lines. They waited in the small visitor lounge down the hall, Dorothy knitting as always, Emma trying and failing to focus on a magazine. After nearly an hour, John appeared. They're asking for you, he said to Emma. Both of them. When Emma entered the room, she found Tom sitting on the edge of Maggie's bed, holding her hand. His eyes were red-rimmed, but he looked composed, determined even. Emma, he greeted her, his voice stronger than she remembered. Maggie's told me everything, about the cancer spreading, about Boston. Emma nodded, unsure what to say. It's a lot to take in. She says you've been helping her, looking out for her when I couldn't. Tom's grip on Maggie's hand tightened slightly. Thank you. Anyone would have done the same, Emma demurred. No, Tom said firmly. Most people would have walked away, called the authorities and washed their hands of us. You didn't. Maggie looked up at Emma. I've decided to go to Boston to try the clinical trial. That's wonderful news, Emma said, genuinely relieved. When did you decide? Just now, Maggie replied. Talking it through with Tom helped, and knowing about the lawsuit settlement, about Tom being taken care of, I told her she has to fight, Tom said, his voice roughening with emotion. That Marie would want her to try everything possible, that I need her to come back to me. The simple, raw honesty of his statement brought tears to Emma's eyes. Despite everything, his illness, their separation, the trauma they'd endured, Tom's love for his sister-in-law remained unwavering, a constant in a world that had taken nearly everything else from them. "There's something else," Maggie added. "Something we want to ask you." Emma looked between them, curious. "We want you to be my healthcare proxy," Maggie explained, "to make decisions for me if I can't. The clinical trial requires one, and—" She exchanged a glance with Tom. "We trust you, Emma." The request took Emma's breath away. "Maggie, I'm honored, but are you sure? We've only known each other a short time." "Time doesn't matter," Tom interjected. "You saw Maggie when no one else did. Really saw her, not just her illness or our circumstances. You fought for us when you had no reason to." Maggie nodded in agreement. "And practically speaking, you understand medical terminology, treatment options." "You can ask the right questions." Emma felt the weight of their trust, the responsibility it entailed. "If you're certain, then yes, I'll do it." The conversation shifted to logistics, the application process for the clinical trial, transportation to Boston, communication plans between Maggie and Tom during her treatment. John rejoined them, offering practical suggestions and support from the sheriff's department. As they talked, Emma marveled at the change in both siblings. Despite the dire diagnosis, despite the separation and uncertainty ahead, they seemed more present, more engaged with the future than when she'd first met them. Having a path forward, however challenging, had restored something essential that their prolonged crisis had stripped away: hope. Later that afternoon, after Tom had returned to Pinewood and Maggie was resting, Emma met with Rachel and Michael Donovan, the medical rights attorney, in the hospital cafeteria. Michael was older than Emma had expected, with silver hair and the weathered face of someone who'd fought difficult battles for decades. "The settlement negotiations are progressing faster than anticipated," he informed them, keeping his voice low though no one was nearby. "Heartland's board is panicking about the media coverage. The whistleblower gave interviews to 3 major outlets yesterday." "What are they offering?" Emma asked. "Current proposal includes full coverage of all denied claims for the affected patients, plus $100,000 per claimant in damages and significant policy reforms moving forward." Emma did a quick mental calculation. Would that cover Maggie's clinical trial expenses and Tom's ongoing treatment? "Easily," Michael confirmed, "plus provide a financial cushion for their future care needs. But there's a catch." There always was, Emma thought ruefully. What is it? "Heartland wants a non-disclosure agreement as part of the settlement. The affected patients would be barred from discussing the details publicly." Rachel scoffed. "Of course they do. Silence the victims, protect the corporate image." Michael spread his hands. "It's standard practice in these cases, and honestly, given the terms they're offering, I'd advise accepting it. This is a remarkably generous settlement by industry standards." "What's the timeline?" Emma asked, thinking of Maggie's rapidly narrowing treatment window. "If we accept their terms, potentially within 2 weeks. If we fight the NDA, months at minimum, possibly years." The choice seemed clear from a practical standpoint. Maggie needed treatment immediately, not the moral victory of being able to speak publicly about Heartland's malfeasance. And the whistleblower had already ensured the company's practices would face public scrutiny regardless. "I'll talk to Maggie," Emma promised. "But I think she'll agree to the terms. Getting treatment for herself and securing Tom's care will be her priorities." As Michael gathered his papers to leave, he paused, studying Emma with a thoughtful expression. "You know, in 28 years of medical rights litigation, I've rarely seen a case where a complete stranger became so invested in a patient's welfare." Most people might make a phone call or donate to a GoFundMe, but you've essentially reorganized your life around helping these two. Emma felt herself flush slightly. It's not that extraordinary. Anyone would— No, Michael interrupted gently. They wouldn't. And that's precisely the problem with our system. It requires extraordinary people doing extraordinary things to fill the gaps. It shouldn't be necessary. But thank God you're here. After he left, Rachel lingered, stirring her coffee absently. He's right, you know. What you've done for Maggie and Tom is remarkable. Emma shook her head, uncomfortable with the praise. I just happened to be the person who found her, who saw what was happening, and then chose to get involved, to stay involved, when it got complicated and messy. Rachel set her cup down. Do you know why I became a patient advocate after leaving Heartland? I assumed because of the unethical practices you witnessed. Partly, Rachel acknowledged, but mostly because of my mother. She had early-onset Alzheimer's when I was in my 20s. We had good insurance, stable finances, medical knowledge in the family, every advantage. And it was still a brutal, exhausting fight to get her proper care. I kept thinking, if it's this hard for us, with all our resources, what happens to people without them? Emma nodded, understanding all too well. They fall through the cracks, like Maggie and Tom nearly did. Exactly. The system isn't designed for people in crisis. It requires patients and families to be at their best, organized, persistent, articulate, precisely when they're at their most vulnerable. Rachel's expression hardened. That's not an accident. It's by design. Complexity and bureaucracy discourage claims, save companies money. The stark assessment resonated with Emma's own observations from her nursing career. So many patients lost in paperwork mazes, denied care on technicalities, forced to choose between medication and rent. The lawsuit will help, Emma said, trying to focus on the positive, make a difference for hundreds of patients. It will, Rachel agreed, but it's a bandage on a gushing wound. The entire system needs reconstruction, not just penalties for the worst offenders. Their somber conversation was interrupted by Emma's phone chiming with a text from Dr. Collins. Maggie asking for you? Good news about clinical trial. When Emma reached Maggie's room, she found her sitting up in bed, a letter in her hands, her expression a mixture of disbelief and cautious joy. I've been accepted, she announced, holding up the letter. The clinical trial at Dana-Farber. They reviewed my case and want me to start as soon as possible. Emma sat beside her, genuinely delighted. Maggie, that's wonderful. When would you go? That's the thing. They have an opening next week. Monday. Maggie's smile faltered slightly. It's happening so fast. I'm not sure I'm ready. What does Dr. Collins say? That it's our best option, that waiting would only allow the cancer to progress further. Maggie folded the letter carefully. I know she's right. It's just overwhelming. Emma understood. After months of having no options, the sudden flurry of possibilities, the lawsuit settlement, the clinical trial, the community support, was its own kind of stress. We'll make it work, she assured Maggie. One step at a time. First, let's talk to your doctors about what you'll need medically for the trip. Then we'll coordinate with my cousin about the housing. Dorothy's already organizing volunteers for the first few weeks. Maggie looked at her with an expression Emma couldn't quite read. Why are you doing all this, Emma? Truly. We were strangers a month ago. The question caught Emma off guard, though it wasn't the first time Maggie had asked something similar. This time, however, she sensed Maggie needed a more complete answer. Partly because I was a nurse, Emma began slowly, organizing her thoughts. I saw too many people fall through the cracks in the system, people who deserved better. And partly because of my own experience, my ex-husband's control, how isolated I felt, how hard it was to ask for help. She paused. realizing there was a deeper truth she hadn't fully acknowledged even to herself. But mostly because when I found those melanomas under your hair, when I saw how long you'd been suffering in silence, I realized something had broken in our community, in our society, that we'd stopped seeing each other. And I couldn't unsee you, Maggie. I couldn't just call 911 and go back to my life. Maggie reached for Emma's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Thank you for seeing me, for seeing Tom, for not looking away. We're going to get through this, Emma promised. All of it. The Boston treatment, Tom's recovery, whatever comes next. Not alone, but together. For the first time since Emma had known her, Maggie's smile reached her eyes, tired, afraid still, but no longer defeated, no longer invisible. 2 days later, the Portland Press-Herald ran its front-page exposé on Heartland Health's systematic denial practices. The reporter had interviewed multiple patients affected by the company's policies. Though respecting Maggie's privacy and medical condition, Emma had declined interview requests on her behalf. Still, Maggie's case featured prominently in the article, described as the catalyst that had exposed the larger pattern of abuses. The whistleblower, now identified as Patricia Holden, former VP of Claims Management, specifically cited Maggie's denied melanoma diagnosis as the case that had finally compelled her to come forward. I reviewed Mrs. Peterson's file personally, Holden was quoted saying. The denial was textbook application of our internal policies, a patient whose family had already incurred high costs, a condition with expensive treatment protocols, a technical justification that would likely discourage appeal. When I learned she'd subsequently developed advanced melanoma that might have been prevented with early intervention, I couldn't remain silent any longer. The article included statements from medical ethics experts, insurance regulators, and patient advocacy groups, all condemning Heartland's practices. But what caught Emma's attention most was a sidebar featuring brief comments from Millfield residents about Maggie and Tom's situation. Dorothy Wilson. They were invisible until Emma Parker noticed something wasn't right. That's the real tragedy. How many others are suffering silently in our communities? John Davidson. This case reveals failures at multiple levels: healthcare, mental health services, social safety nets. We need to do better as a society. Rachel Stevens. What happened to the Reynolds family isn't an anomaly or a bureaucratic mistake. It's the predictable outcome of a system designed to prioritize profits over patients. The collective voice of Millfield, speaking up not just for Maggie and Tom but for systemic change, filled Emma with unexpected pride in her small town. They had rallied around strangers in need, offering not just financial support but genuine community, the antidote to the isolation that had exacerbated the Reynolds situation in the first place. As Emma folded the newspaper, her phone rang. Michael Donovan calling with an update on the settlement negotiations. The whistleblower's public statements had shifted the dynamics considerably. Heartland was now offering even more generous terms, desperate to resolve the case before shareholder lawsuits and regulatory investigations gained momentum. They've dropped the NDA requirement, Michael reported, his voice betraying rare excitement. And they're offering expedited payments to patients with urgent medical needs like Maggie. How expedited? Emma asked, hardly daring to hope. Funds could be available as early as this week. They're establishing a special account for the Boston expenses, housing, transportation, caregivers, anything the clinical trial doesn't cover. Emma closed her eyes, overwhelmed with relief. That changes everything, Michael. It means Maggie can focus entirely on getting well without financial worries hanging over her. Exactly. And Tom's long-term care at Pinewood will be fully covered, including the specialized TBI therapy they recommend. The pieces were falling into place with an almost miraculous symmetry. The justice of it, that the very company whose policies had contributed to Maggie's advanced cancer would now fund her last, best hope for treatment, felt like a narrative correction, the universe balancing its books. When Emma arrived at the hospital to share the news, she found Maggie already in conversation with Dr. Collins and a new doctor she didn't recognize, a distinguished-looking woman in her 50s introduced as Dr. Eleanor Winters from Dana-Farber. Dr. Winters was in Portland for a conference and came to evaluate Maggie personally, Dr. Collins explained, given the complexity of her case and the tight timeline for the clinical trial. Dr. Winters smiled warmly at Emma. "You must be the famous Emma Parker I've heard so much about, Maggie's guardian angel." Emma felt herself flush. "Hardly that, just a concerned friend." "Well, friend," Dr. Winters said, "I was just explaining to Maggie that based on my examination and review of her records, I believe she's an excellent candidate for our trial. The combination therapy we're testing has shown remarkable results in patients with similar metastatic patterns." "That's wonderful news," Emma said, genuinely relieved. She turned to Maggie. "And I have some good news, too, about the settlement." As Emma shared Michael's update, she watched hope bloom on Maggie's face, not just for herself, but for Tom, for their future together after treatment. For the first time, the path forward seemed not just possible, but probable. The obstacles that had seemed insurmountable just weeks ago now reduced to logistical challenges with clear solutions. "So, it's really happening," Maggie said softly when Emma finished. "Boston, the trial, a real chance." "Yes," Emma confirmed, squeezing her hand. "It's really happening." Dr. Winters checked her watch. "I should head back to Portland for my flight. But I'll see you Monday in Boston, Maggie. My team is looking forward to working with you." After the doctors left, Maggie turned to Emma, her expression serious despite the good news. "There's something I need to ask you. Something important. Of course, anything. Would you come with me?" "To Boston, at least for the first week?" Maggie requested, her voice hesitant. "I know it's a lot to ask with your business and your life here, but I'm scared, Emma. Of the treatment, of being alone in a strange city, of what might happen." The vulnerability in her admission, the courage it took to ask for help after so long fending for herself, touched Emma deeply. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Dorothy can watch the Salon. Millfield can survive without haircuts for a week." Maggie's relief was palpable. "Thank you. I'll never be able to repay everything you've done." "That's not how this works," Emma said gently. "You don't owe me anything. This is what community means, being there for each other, especially when it's hard." As Emma helped Maggie gather her few belongings, preparing for discharge the following day, she reflected on the extraordinary journey they'd embarked on since that moment in her salon. From strangers to something closer than friends, bound together by crisis, by advocacy, by the simple human imperative to care for one another. Whatever happened in Boston, whatever the clinical trial might bring, they would face it not as patient and caretaker, but as family of choice, the kind forged not by blood but by compassion, by seeing each other truly and refusing to look away. 3 months later, Emma stood in her salon, carefully trimming Mrs. Henderson's silver hair, while Dorothy Wilson sat nearby, flipping through a magazine. The April sunshine streamed through the front windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "Any word from Maggie this week?" Dorothy asked, not looking up from her reading. Emma smiled, meeting Dorothy's eyes in the mirror. "Got an email yesterday. The latest scans show the tumors in her lungs have shrunk by almost 60%. The doctors are calling it a remarkable response." Mrs. Henderson, the retired elementary school principal, nodded approvingly. "That clinical trial was the right choice. My nephew participated in one for his leukemia 5 years ago. Still in remission." "It hasn't been easy," Emma acknowledged. thinking of the difficult weeks she'd spent in Boston during Maggie's initial treatment. The violent side effects, the days when Maggie was too weak to walk from bed to bathroom, the nights filled with fever and pain. But she's fighting hard. Dr. Winters says her attitude is half the battle. Dorothy set aside her magazine. And Tom? John mentioned he'd been moved to the step-down unit at Pinewood? Yes, he's doing well enough that they've reduced his supervision level. He's participating in group therapy now, even leading some sessions about traumatic brain injury for other patients. Emma couldn't keep the pride from her voice. He and Maggie video chat every evening. Those calls are the highlight of her day. The bell above the door jingled, and John Davidson entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. Emma had been expecting him. They had lunch plans to discuss the latest developments in the Heartland Health Settlement, which had finally been approved by the court. "Almost done here, John," Emma called. "Have a seat." He settled into one of the waiting chairs, picking up a magazine but not opening it. Emma noticed the folder tucked under his arm, likely containing the final settlement documents Michael Donovan had sent over. As Emma finished Mrs. Henderson's trim and brushed loose hair from her shoulders, Dorothy turned to John. "I hear the town council approved the proposal for the free clinic." John nodded. "Unanimous vote. The settlement funds will cover operating costs for at least 5 years. After that, we'll need to find sustainable funding, but it's a start." The free clinic had been Rachel Stevens' idea, using a portion of the community's settlement funds to establish a basic health care facility in Millfield, eliminating the hour-long drive to Camden that had been a barrier for so many residents. The town had enthusiastically embraced the concept, donating space in the community center and volunteering professional services. After Mrs. Henderson paid and left with a promise to bring Emma some of her famous blueberry muffins, Emma removed her apron and grabbed her purse. "Ready for lunch?" "Actually," John said, standing, "I thought we might stop by Pinewood first. Tom has some news he wanted to share in person." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Good news or bad news?" "Good, I think. He seemed excited when he called." Dorothy waved them off. "I'll watch the shop. Mrs. Baxter isn't due for another hour, and I can handle a simple wash and set if anyone walks in." The drive to Pinewood Treatment Center took them through budding spring forests, the landscape transformed from the snowy wilderness of January. Emma thought about how much had changed in just 3 months. Not just the seasons, but lives rebuilt, systems reformed, community bonds strengthened. Pinewood itself looked different in spring, the institutional facade softened by flowering dogwoods and carefully tended gardens where patients could sit outdoors. They found Tom in one such garden, dressed not in the facility-issued clothing Emma remembered, but in jeans and a button-up shirt, looking more like the competent man he must have been before tragedy and illness had taken their toll. "Emma!" he called, spotting them approaching. He stood, his movements more fluid than she remembered, his smile genuine and reaching his eyes. "And Chief Davidson, thanks for coming." They settled on a bench beneath a flowering cherry tree, Tom's excitement palpable as he smoothed his hands over his knees repeatedly. "You're looking well," Emma observed. "The new medication must be working." "Better than anyone expected," Tom confirmed. "Dr. Marshall says my brain is forming new pathways around the damaged areas. The hallucinations are almost gone, and when they do come, I can recognize them for what they are." "That's wonderful progress," Emma said warmly. "It's why I asked you to come today," Tom continued, glancing at John as if for reassurance. "Dr. Marshall has approved me for the Community Reintegration Program. Starting next month, I'll be allowed to live in supervised housing in town, continue therapy as an outpatient, and, this is the big part, I can start working again, part-time at first, with accommodations for my condition." Emma's heart swelled at this news. "Tom, that's fantastic. Have you told Maggie?" "Not yet. I wanted to be sure it was really happening. And he hesitated, looking suddenly vulnerable. I wanted to ask something important. The supervised housing they've arranged is a small apartment above the hardware store. It has 2 bedrooms. Understanding dawned on Emma. You're hoping Maggie can live with you when she returns from Boston? Tom nodded, his expression both hopeful and anxious. The doctors say her treatment will continue for months, maybe years, but much of it could be managed through the regional hospital in Portland. With just periodic visits to Dana-Farber, she'd need a stable place to recover between treatments. And you want to provide that for her? Emma said softly. It's what Marie would have wanted, Tom replied, his voice roughening slightly at the mention of his late wife. For us to take care of each other, but I need to know if you think it's a good idea. If I'm well enough to help her, not be another burden. The question touched Emma deeply. The humility it represented. Tom's clear-eyed assessment of his own limitations, his prioritization of Maggie's needs over his pride. I think it's exactly what Maggie needs, she said honestly. A home to return to, family waiting for her. And you've made incredible progress, Tom. With the continued support from Pinewood and the community, I believe you two will be good for each other. The relief on Tom's face was palpable. That means a lot coming from you. Maggie trusts your judgment more than anyone's. John, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. The apartment will need some modifications for Maggie's condition. Grab bars in the bathroom, maybe a stair lift if the stairs are too much during her recovery periods. The settlement covers home modifications, Tom said, having clearly thought this through. And Heartland is paying for a part-time home health aide when needed. As they discussed the practical details, Emma marveled at the transformation in Tom. 4 months ago, he had been barely functioning, lost in paranoia and grief. Now he was planning for the future, considering Maggie's needs, navigating complex healthcare logistics with clarity and purpose. After leaving Pinewood, Emma and John continued to the Millfield Diner for their planned lunch. As they settled into a booth by the window, John pulled out the folder he'd been carrying. The final settlement documents, he explained, sliding them across the table. Rachel asked me to go over them with you since you're Maggie's healthcare proxy. Emma opened the folder, scanning the legal language with its formal acknowledgement of Heartland Health's systematic and improper denial of valid medical claims. The financial terms were even more substantial than originally proposed: full coverage of all medical expenses related to the improperly denied conditions, significant compensatory damages, and a trust established for ongoing care needs. This will make such a difference for them, Emma said, signing where indicated. No more choosing between medication and food, between Tom's care and Maggie's. It's going to help a lot of families, John agreed. The class action eventually included over 400 patients, some cases even worse than Maggie's. Their conversation was interrupted by the waitress bringing coffee, a young woman Emma recognized as having recently graduated from the local high school. I heard about the free clinic opening next month, the waitress Jenny said as she poured. My mom's really excited. She's been putting off getting her thyroid checked because of the cost. Tell her to come in during the first week, Emma suggested. Dr. Collins will be seeing patients 3 days a week to start. After Jenny moved on to other tables, John studied Emma over the rim of his coffee cup. You know, when you first got involved with Maggie and Tom's situation, I thought you were taking on too much, getting too emotionally invested in what looked like a straightforward neglect case. Emma smiled wryly. You weren't wrong about the emotional investment part. No, but I was wrong about it being too much, John admitted. Your involvement changed everything, not just for them, but for the whole town. This clinic, the settlement, the way people have come together. None of that would have happened if you'd just called 911 and gone back to cutting hair. The observation made Emma uncomfortable, as praise often did. Anyone would have. No, John interrupted gently. That's what we tell ourselves, but it's not true. Most people would have done the minimum required by conscience and law. You did the maximum possible by compassion and conviction. There's a difference. Emma was saved from responding by her phone chiming with an incoming call. Seeing Maggie's name on the screen, she excused herself and stepped outside the diner to answer. "Emma?" Maggie's voice came through, stronger than it had been in recent calls. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course." "Is everything okay?" Emma asked, leaning against the diner's brick exterior. "Better than okay," Maggie replied, and Emma could hear the smile in her voice. "Dr. Winters just left. The latest blood work shows the tumor markers have decreased dramatically, and the side effects are becoming more manageable with each treatment cycle." "That's wonderful news, Maggie." "There's more," Maggie continued. "If the response continues at this rate, Dr. Winters thinks I might be able to complete the next phase of the trial as an outpatient, coming to Boston just once every 3 weeks for treatment. I could come home, Emma, at least part of the time." The emotion in Maggie's voice brought tears to Emma's eyes. "Actually, I just came from seeing Tom, and he has some news that dovetails perfectly with yours." Emma explained about Tom's approved transition to supervised housing and his hope that Maggie would join him there. As she spoke, she could hear Maggie's quiet sniffles on the other end of the line. "A real home," Maggie said when Emma finished. "After everything, I can hardly believe it." "Believe it?" Emma encouraged. "You've both fought so hard to get here. You deserve this chance." After promising to call again that evening with more details, Maggie ended the call. Emma stood for a moment in the spring sunshine, wiping away her own tears before composing herself to rejoin John inside. 2 weeks later, Emma found herself in the newly renovated apartment above Millfield Hardware, helping Dorothy arrange furniture donated by townspeople. The space was small but bright, with windows overlooking Main Street and the distant hills beyond. Tom had already moved in the essential items, a bed, a table, basic kitchen supplies, but the women were adding the touches that would make it truly feel like home. "These curtains were Marie's," Dorothy commented, hanging a pair of floral drapes in the second bedroom, Maggie's room. "Tom had them in storage all this time. Said Marie would want Maggie to have something familiar when she comes home." Emma smoothed a quilt over the bed, another community donation. "When does Maggie's next treatment cycle end? 10 days?" 9, Dorothy corrected. "John's driving to Boston to bring her back. Tom would go, but his doctors don't want him making the long trip just yet." As they worked, Emma thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that horrifying moment in her salon when she discovered Maggie's condition, through the medical emergencies, legal battles, and emotional reckonings, to this point of cautious hope and new beginnings. It wasn't a perfect ending. Maggie's cancer remained a serious threat. Tom's recovery would require ongoing support and vigilance, but it was infinitely better than where they had been. The grand opening of the Millfield Free Clinic coincided with Maggie's return home. Emma had initially worried the event might overwhelm Maggie, still weak from her treatment, but she had insisted on attending, wanting to see firsthand the community initiative her case had helped inspire. The clinic occupied what had once been the community center's administrative offices, now transformed into examination rooms, a small laboratory, and a reception area. Dr. Collins would serve as the primary physician, with specialists from Portland rotating in weekly. The modest facility couldn't handle major emergencies or complex procedures, but it could provide preventive care, chronic disease management, and basic diagnostic services, precisely the kind of early intervention that might have caught Maggie's melanoma before it advanced. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew a sizable crowd. Rachel Stevens gave a brief speech about healthcare access in rural communities, followed by Dr. Collins explaining the clinic's services. But the most powerful moment came when Tom stepped forward, Maggie beside him in a wheelchair, to share their story. A year ago, my sister-in-law and I were living in an abandoned garage, both of us sick, both of us afraid, both of us unable to access the care we desperately needed, Tom began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his face. We had fallen through every crack in a system that seemed designed to exclude people like us. Not destitute enough for full government assistance, not wealthy enough to pay out of pocket, not connected enough to navigate the bureaucracy. He paused, glancing down at Maggie, who nodded encouragingly. What saved us wasn't just medical intervention, though we're profoundly grateful for that. What saved us was a community that refused to look away. One person, Emma Parker, who saw beyond our circumstances to our humanity, who recognized that sometimes people need more than they can ask for. Emma felt her cheeks warm as several people turned to look at her, standing unobtrusively at the back of the crowd. This clinic, Tom continued, represents what healthcare should be: accessible, compassionate, embedded in community. It won't solve every problem or heal every illness, but it will ensure that no one in Millfield has to choose between food and medicine, between rent and a cancer screening, between dignity and survival. As applause broke out, Emma watched Maggie reach up to squeeze Tom's hand, a simple gesture of familial support that would have been impossible months ago. The sight filled her with a quiet joy that transcended the sadness of their circumstances, the uncertainty of Maggie's prognosis, the ongoing challenges they would face. After the ceremony, as people mingled and toured the new facility, Emma found herself alone with Maggie for a moment, away from the crowd. "How are you really feeling?" she asked softly. "This must be overwhelming after the quiet of the hospital." Maggie smiled, the expression lighting her thin face despite the clear signs of her ongoing treatment. The kerchief covering her bare scalp, the hollows beneath her cheekbones, the careful way she held herself to minimize pain. "Honestly, I'm tired. The treatment takes so much out of me." She looked around at the community gathered to celebrate the clinic. "But being here, seeing all of this, it gives me strength, purpose." "You've made such a difference, Maggie. Your story changed things." "Our story," Maggie corrected gently. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't looked beneath my hair that day, if you hadn't been willing to see what was really happening." Emma crouched beside the wheelchair, taking Maggie's hand. "Are you nervous about the new arrangement with Tom?" "It's okay if you are. It's a big adjustment for both of you." "A little," Maggie admitted. "We're both different now, changed by everything that's happened. But in some ways, I think we're stronger together than we were before, more honest with each other, more willing to ask for help when we need it." The wisdom in her observation struck Emma deeply. So many relationships fractured under the weight of illness and hardship, yet somehow Maggie and Tom had found their way to a deeper understanding, a more authentic connection through their shared trauma. As Emma helped Maggie rejoin the gathering, she noticed John Davidson in deep conversation with Rachel Stevens near the clinic entrance. Their heads were bent close together, their expressions animated as they discussed something that clearly engaged them both. Emma smiled to herself, wondering if perhaps another unexpected connection had formed amidst the chaos of the past few months. The following day, Emma closed the salon early to help Maggie settle into the apartment. Though Tom had prepared everything meticulously, there were still adjustments needed: the placement of Maggie's medications, arrangements for her comfort during the difficult days following treatment, coordination of the home health aides' visits. As they organized the small bathroom, arranging Maggie's supplies where she could easily reach them, Emma noticed a framed photograph newly hung on the wall. Marie, Tom, and Maggie together at what appeared to be a lakeside picnic, all three smiling broadly in the sunshine. "That was 2 months before Marie's diagnosis," Maggie said, noticing Emma's gaze. Our annual trip to Lake Champlain, we had no idea what was coming. She was beautiful, Emma observed. You look like her. People always said that. Maggie smiled sadly. Sisters, but could have been twins. Same laugh, same mannerisms. It made it harder for Tom after she died, I think. Seeing her in me, but not her. Emma considered this, understanding better the complex dynamics that had bound this small family together through unimaginable hardship. And now, is it still difficult for him? Maggie thought for a moment. Different now. I think he sees me as me again, not just an echo of Marie. And I see him as Tom, not just my sister's husband who needs my help. We've become our own kind of family. The simple articulation of this evolution touched Emma deeply. How rare it was for people to grow through tragedy rather than merely survive it, to find new connections rather than cling to old patterns. As they finished the bathroom arrangements, Tom called from the kitchen that he'd picked up dinner from the diner, comfort food for Maggie's first night home. The normalcy of the moment, a family meal in a modest apartment, nothing extraordinary except the journey that had brought them there, felt like a victory more significant than any medical breakthrough or legal settlement. Later, as Emma prepared to leave, Maggie insisted on walking her to the door despite her fatigue. I've been thinking about what happens next, Maggie said, leaning against the doorframe for support. After the trial ends, after my treatment protocol is established, about what I want to do with whatever time I have. And what have you decided? Emma asked, sensing Maggie had something specific in mind. I want to volunteer at the clinic, Maggie replied. Not in a medical capacity, obviously, but as a patient advocate. Someone who knows firsthand what it's like to fall through the cracks, who can help others navigate the system that nearly killed me. The purposefulness in Maggie's voice, the determination to transform her suffering into service, struck Emma as the ultimate act of healing, not just of the body, but of the spirit. I think you'd be remarkable at that, Emma said honestly. No one understands the gaps in the system better than someone who's fallen through them. Maggie nodded, a quiet confidence in her bearing that had been absent when Emma first met her. Dr. Collins thinks so too. We've already discussed how it might work, even during my ongoing treatment. As they said their goodbyes, Maggie suddenly embraced Emma, the gesture catching her by surprise with its strength and emotion. Thank you, Maggie whispered. Not just for seeing what was wrong that day in your salon, but for seeing what was right, that Tom and I deserved a chance, that our lives had value even when we couldn't fight for ourselves anymore. Emma returned the embrace, careful of Maggie's fragile frame, but wanting to convey the depth of her own feeling. You've given back as much as you've received, Maggie, more probably. This community is stronger because of you and Tom, because of your willingness to share your story, to let people help. As Emma drove home through the quiet streets of Millfield, she reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with a simple haircut appointment 4 months ago. How one moment of truly seeing another person's suffering had catalyzed changes that rippled outward. A life saved, a family reunited, a community awakened, a healthcare system challenged. She thought of what Maggie had said about purpose, about finding meaning in whatever time remained to her. There was wisdom there that transcended Maggie's specific circumstances, a reminder that healing came in many forms, not always as physical recovery, but sometimes as reconciliation, as connection, as the courage to begin again despite uncertainty. Emma pulled into her driveway as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Tomorrow, she would return to her salon, to the rhythm of ordinary days cutting hair and listening to town gossip. But something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of what those ordinary days contained. The hidden struggles of her neighbors, the power of simple attention, the possibility that any encounter might be the one that changes everything. She thought of Maggie and Tom in their small apartment above the hardware store, building a life from the fragments of what had been lost. Not a perfect life, not one free from pain or uncertainty, but one rich with meaning and connection. One where they were seen, truly seen, by each other and by their community. In the end, perhaps that was the most profound healing of all. Folks, our story reminds us of something many of us have forgotten in this digital age: the power of truly seeing one another. Emma Parker didn't do anything extraordinary that January morning. She simply paid attention when others hadn't. When was the last time someone really saw you? Your struggles, your needs, your quiet dignity? Or when did you last truly see someone else? In our retirement years, many of us become gradually invisible to society, our health concerns dismissed, our voices quieted. Yet we still hold the wisdom of experience and the power to transform our communities. Like Maggie and Tom, we all deserve to be seen, not as problems to solve or burdens to bear, but as human beings with value and purpose. Their story reminds us it's never too late for a new beginning, never too late to find meaning in suffering, never too late to rebuild what's been broken. The challenges may be different: cancer, loneliness, limited mobility, but the remedy begins with the same simple act: seeing and being seen. What's one small way you could make someone in your community feel truly seen this week? Has anyone recently made you feel visible when you were struggling silently? Share your story below. You never know who needs to hear it.